To order. The first thing on our agenda tonight is the minutes from September 27th. We have any minutes? Yes, in a minute.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of the minutes of September 27, 2018, and November 20th, 2018. That's correct.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay.
Public comment?
Public comment. Is anyone here that'd like to make a public comment? About anything? Let's see, I had thought of something, but I won't. Okay. No, hearing none?
Okay, so I move that we take the agenda out of order so that we can take care of the public discussion about the site plan review
And design review on,
site plan review and design review on 19 Research Road.
need a second.
A second.
All in favor? Aye. You're up.
The engineer is, excuse me, my name is Paul Glenn. I represent the applicant Beige Box and Phil Westling, the principal of the applicant. We're here tonight to deal with two buildings, site plan review for two buildings up in the Tech Park. And Joel Kubrick, the engineer at Holmes and McGrath, is in the car right now driving over here. He thought it was going to be a little later, but he'll be here probably by the time I sit down. I think he's driving here now. He will explain all the details of the plan to you. Okay, so I'm here just to introduce myself, Joel, and Phil, who's had a lot of experience in commercial, managing commercial real estate. He has another property up in the Tech Park already that's he's had for a while, 20 years or more, I think. And he also manages some commercial property at Tradesman down the street from there. So it's very experienced. The people who he has coming in to be tenants here, Cape Cod Associates and the McLean Group. That's what we call them, right? The McLean Group. They, McLean Research. They do research and development, type of jobs Falmouth would like to see here, and they'll be maintaining jobs by being able to stay here and adding to jobs in Falmouth to be able to stay here. So we hope you'll look kindly upon the, our site plan review tonight. And I'm here to answer questions about other matters, not about the plan. Joel's gonna do that. But if you have any other type of questions, either before or after Joel makes his presentation, I'll be here. I have my file. I don't know if you have any questions right now, before Joel makes the presentation? No, okay, but I'll be here. Here he comes, okay. I don't want to start it. I'll just say something. We'll let Joel do it, okay? Here's Joel.
Notices? Okay, why don't you read, we have an announcement too on notices. Paul, would you?
Notice of public hearing was published on 11/9/18, and 9 abutters were notified by regular mail.
Sorry for the delay getting here.
Well, we jumped the gun on
I
it.
know.
so.
But here we are. So, I'm sure you read the summary of what this project is, but I'll give you a little overview of where the project is. There we go. In the tech park here, so you can see the solar panels for the hockey rink up in north of this site. There's an existing 2,500 square foot footprint building, 2-story masonry structure there with the existing driveway off of Research Road here, which is shared with these two buildings out front. This was approved by the planning board in 1991, I believe. Shortly after this, phase 2 of the Tech Park subdivision was also approved by the planning board about that same time. So the proposed work here is a little state of the existing. There's a 50-foot wildlife corridor that was imposed as part of that definitive subdivision approval by the planning board. That's all around that developable part of the parcel here. So there's the existing building, existing septic system. And again, this was approved by the planning board as part of the site plan review back in the early 90s. Here's what we're proposing. 2 new 1-story base type warehouse structures, reconfiguration of the existing parking to allow for additional parking and access to those overhead doors. There's a new septic system going into service these two buildings. There are holding tanks for the floor drains as required at each building. And there's an additional drainage structure going right here to handle the new parking. So there's the landscaping plan. It's a little bit different. They had just an earlier revision that had didn't have the pavement coming over here, and this building was slightly different, so there's a sidewalk out front. But essentially, this is the same intent. You know, this existing landscaped area is just going to be modified again to work with the new proposed reconfigured parking area. And there's going to be a sign out front, and I noticed that in the comments from the engineering department, they recommended some signs down on Research Road, which would be good, especially with the different uses that are going to be up along that driveway way off the road. So between all that, we've got a couple elevations of the larger building that's on the east side of the property, and the smaller one on the south side of the property. I believe this meets all your requirements. These uses are intended to be research and development or light manufacturing, as are approved by the Cape Cod Commission in their reduction of the DRI thresholds. So they increased the thresholds for that type of development within the Falmouth Tech Park up to 40,000 square feet. So we're well under that instead of the 10,000, which is the typical threshold. And this is also part of the development agreement between the EDIC and the Cape Cod Commission as far as traffic mitigation, watershed, water resources. So this is less than 2,000 gallons per day of septic, which is part of that agreement. This is figured into the flow that's going to the West Falmouth Harbor watershed. So that was included in some of those earlier calculations when they were looking at that. So I believe this meets all the requirements. I do have turning movements. I know that was another consideration. I think I actually have them. Yeah. So there's it's the fire truck, the town's ladder truck getting around there, and there's a single unit truck which is also the same size as the town's ambulance. So both of those can maneuver around that the proposed and existing reconfigured parking and driveway access. I think that might be most of the main considerations that were brought up as part of the review by the town, but I'd be welcome any questions.
Bob?
One of the others was the access to the dumpster. Is that it, way up on the top?
It is,
there?
yep.
And that's been resolved, so they can just back in and
Pull right in, yep.
out. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Are these the same materials and height as Bird refinishing?
As which?
Bird furniture refinishing, it's not in that park, it's just one street down, but they look the same.
They're 2 feet taller, apparently.
And same materials? Thank you. And what is the open item here from the Cape Cod Commission?
I'm not sure.
This area going to the...
Let's check both open and closed.
If
On- on
if I may, the question that came up previously was this subject to Cape Cod Commission review. And as Joel pointed out, and I think we even indicated previously, this is part of a development agreement with Cape Cod Commission, so the buildings over 10,000 square feet don't require a DRI, and they can proceed without having to go to the commission.
Thank you.
If we didn't have if the EDIC didn't have the agreement in place, could this still be done? Because I heard the Cape Cod Commission's got a new set of rules now.
To the best of my knowledge, if without that development agreement, if it's over 10,000 square feet, it would be referred to the Cape Cod Commission under the current regulation.
Okay. Well, it's not, doesn't matter for this one, because you got it. So I was thinking just for other reasons. Yep.
And could I ask the question, what was the resolution of the handicap parking space discussion?
So as the town engineer, staff engineer pointed out, depending on the use of these buildings, all the parking there is essentially accessible. It's visible, it meets the slope requirements, the surface requirements. You know, each of these meets the width and the length of a handicap parking space. There are access aisles which are really to block off for the overhead doors, which are gonna have minimal amount of traffic coming in and out of there. So it's essentially, you know, each of these bays is gonna be visitable as you would, you know, define it. As far as clearly identifying one individual space along any of those, I don't know if that's necessary, but certainly if required, we could make one of those work and just add the required placards. There are the 2 accessible parking spaces over here for this building and an accessible route to get into that building. Those are existing and are intended to stay there. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, but I think we have the ability to make any of these inaccessible, although the town engineer did point out that there is an out for us as far as whether these are open to the public. I mean, these are for employees, so like I said, there are, it meets the requirements for access to them, but.
Paul, you had a question?
Yeah, I have 2, please. One is the driveway seems very tight. Is that going to be designated as one way through the property?
It meets the requirements for a 2-way driveway. It's 24 feet wide.
They're putting trucks going to the right, they can still get in there? Or is
Yep.
it a one-way traffic with all through there?
It's intended to be 2-way traffic. You know, that's a fire truck that's about the size of, you know, the largest vehicle you'd expect to see in there for, you know, random deliveries if needed. Most traffic might be from a box truck or that size vehicle, and again, that's certainly accessible. You know, maybe I didn't drive that the best, but I hope they could do it better on the ground and still get in there. And this is, you know, you've got the full circulation around there so people can get in and out. I don't expect that there's going to be major traffic jams there depending on when people are coming in and out of there. But I don't see a need for it
You
to
don't
be
think,
one way.
you see no need to make it one-way, even if a truck is backing up into one of those bays?
Well, you gotta get out of there. I mean, there's only one way in.
I mean, obviously this driveway is
tight.
the
Okay.
choke point, but
The other comment is the DPW mentioned no number of discrepancies on the drainage. Are you going to be address those issues?
I will. That was mostly about the existing drainage and the modeling of that. And again, we're actually reducing the amount of pavement and impervious surfaces that are going to be flowing to that existing drainage. We're adding the new drainage, which is going to handle all of this new pavement area. But I can certainly discuss with them.
You'll be addressing those issues?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
John, do you have any questions down there?
No, it looks good to me.
You all set?
Yeah, looks good.
Pat, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm assuming where each one of those, like, loading docks is, that all of that could be essentially subdivided into other units, although there are only 2 tenants mentioned at this.
There are, I believe, 10, 12 doors. So, I mean, there's the potential possibly to have those, but that's all figured into our calculations as far as number of employees for the parking and for the septic system. So, I mean, it's covered in that end.
Well, that was
Yep.
the basis, you
Yep.
know, if you divided it into more businesses than those that are currently anticipated, which, who knows, it could happen in a number of
Yep.
years.
That's,
Was that all taken into account?
that was, yeah. So it's 2.5 employees per bay, basically, is how we came up with the 30 employees.
I'm fine, and we all set?
I would like to condition it based on satisfaction resolution of drainage issues.
Okay?
Okay.
That'll,
You've
and,
agreed to that for this?
and I think that they should designate one of, I understand that they all actually work for handicap parking because the doors are being opened, but you should designate one of them.
I mean, my only concern with that, Mr. Chairman, is that if we designate it over here and the person that needs to access it is
Yeah.
over here, that's
Okay.
my concern about that. But like I said,
Well, why don't you have one of them available and you can move the sign around?
Yeah.
that's,
I mean, we have a requirement for the handicap, and you can put it anywhere as long as it's there.
understood.
So you have one in each building.
One in each building?
Well, we already have one over there. See, you got two
Two,
buildings there,
so
one on
we-
each side of the street, yeah.
Okay.
You already have one for the existing building, correct?
There's
is
two
two
for the
handicap
existing
spots there.
building. Depending on which code you go by for the ADA, we could either get away with two, or we might be required to have three, as per the comments by the town engineer. So we could add a space here and designate it as accessible and paint it as such and have the placard. And that way they could, access this building and most of this building. And again, it's all visitable, so they could park somewhere else if they needed to.
I think if it isn't too difficult, I can see how it would work the way it is, but it is a requirement, so if we could do that, that'd be good. Anybody else have anything else?
Just one final comment. I like the idea of building out some of the property in Tech Park. There's a lot of open space there, and I think it's a very good concept.
Thank you.
Okay, so I move we take it under advisement and have a decision drafted for our next meeting.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I move that we go back to the original agenda order.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the A and R for Christ Lutheran Church is a scratch for tonight?
I thought we have recodification first.
No.
No, we didn't.
Okay. Oh, fine. I was going to that anyways.
But if anybody is
Recodification.
here for
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
it's
if anyone's here, we're not doing 485 Brick Hill Road, if anyone's here for that.
That's been canceled, or is it delayed?
Postponed. We'll be back.
Why was that?
I didn't get a reason
If I
why.
may?
Oh.
Our requirements for A and Rs require to provide the board with enough information to endorse a plan. One of those requirements of endorsing an A and R plan is there adequate access to the middle portion of the lot. And we typically do that by looking at the topography to see if there's a wetland or a pond or something between the road right-of-way and the rest of the property. This isn't something that's been regularly done by engineers over the years, and me as the new guy in reading what our regs are have asked for that information. Everyone's been able to provide it. These folks weren't able to get it to us turned around in time, so we kicked it back a week for them to provide that topographical information so the board can endorse the plan, and we're still within our requirements for endorsing the plan by December 11th.
Great.
Okay. So recodification, you're up.
Well, thank you. I'm Bob Mitchell, one of the consultants working for the town on the recodification of the zoning bylaw, and are you joining me?
I'm going to join you.
Oh, okay. So we have a combination of things tonight that we're bringing to you. A few are in response to the conversation we had at the end of September at your meeting then, when you suggested and made some recommended edits and changes, or asked us to look into some things. And so I'll be pointing those out to you. We have one new article, which is Article 2, the Administration and Enforcement draft. It's one of those articles where we're not really doing anything substantively, but it's, being reformatted and reorganized into the new organizational structure of the bylaw. And you can see we did some language tweaking, and it's all in track changes. And then the definition section, we have the index that we talked about, because there was differences of opinion about how to have definitions listed. And then I put together sort of a to-do list, if you will, from that meeting, as sort of where things stand, and so you should have that as well, if you don't.
Yes, the to-do list, if I may, should be the second page of your document, Town of Falmouth recodification to-do list.
So we just wanted to,
Yeah. Oh,
Tom, do you have another book?
I do.
I'm short.
so we wanted to just kind of go over as to where things stand there was a whole lot of homework that we all needed to do. And so we just want to go over where things stand so we can keep things moving. And then, and those are the main topics we wanted to cover tonight. So, with that, I'd like to start at the beginning and go in sequence,
Yes.
so we can stay focused and get through this as quickly as possible. So,
Do 2 first or no?
do,
Are we skipping
In
over
the
2?
order of our.
oh, I don't know what order your book's in.
Okay, it's got.
So
it's
I
the
will-
To-do list.
the to-do
Oh,
list.
no, can we start with the actual articles and get through those? So Article 1?
I have a quick question, Article
Sure.
1, if I may.
Yeah, that's where we're starting, so.
No, it's Article 2, sorry.
Okay.
Article 2.
Okay.
So Article 1 was one of the articles you reviewed in September, and there was various conversation about the purpose section, you may recall. And a couple of existing sections of language to conserve health and to provide adequate light. There was a recommendation that those be deleted because how does that actually apply, and that we should put in some broader language, which is kind of a standard purpose of zoning anyway, which is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. That's in almost all zoning bylaws, and that's in the statutory, it's in the Home Rule Amendment, it's in the statutory background of the state law. So reflecting that language is, is appropriate. There was a recommendation about, putting in something about preventing blight and protecting and enhance the conservation of natural resources and the environment. So, not major changes, but you can see in track changes what we did based on what we understood you to recommend to us. And so, did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? There's something else you've noticed, something else you want to add or change or question or whatever.
Charlotte?
Comment and a question. I like the changes that you made, no problem. The things that are in red are looking like they followed what we had said, and that's good. The section that's added, the bylaw is intended to give reasonable consideration of the character. We had some discussion about including preservation and enhancement of character somehow or other, and this does it, but following sort of a general rule of organization to go from the general to the more specific. Wouldn't that statement more nearly belong immediately under purpose?
You're correct, and now that you say that, I think actually, maybe it was you or somebody else mentioned that at the last meeting, and it just realized that we didn't move it up, but
But you plan on, okay. and
we'll do that.
Thank you. And the other one is a question. I understand that phrase, health, safety, and welfare, is a standard that's just plopped into a number of laws and things all over the Commonwealth and the country. I wonder if welfare has ever been defined, that word. Could be anything.
I can't answer that specifically. It wouldn't surprise me if one or more court cases around the country has addressed that kind of a question, because it is so ubiquitous, that phrase. And somebody is, just the way the world works, somebody's probably claimed, well, what does welfare mean? But again, I think from the court decisions I've seen that even have addressed that phrase, they really look at it in the broadest sense possible. Having safe streets, having good neighborhoods, having, those kinds of things, logical, some rational zoning scheme for the town, allowing housing to be built, all of that falls under the broad welfare of the people of the town. And beyond that, I haven't ever come across something much more specific.
It seems frequently to come up in the context of economic welfare. You give welfare, you receive welfare, you create welfare. It's an economic term also. Would you think that?
Yes, I think, this term actually goes back decades and decades. And it evolves, what people think it means evolves over time. Economic welfare, environmental welfare, public health and welfare sort of used to be combined together. And so I think the courts look at, when they get a case, they look at sort of the common understanding of the term or the phrase at that time. They don't, say, well, what did this mean in 1938? And that's all we'll think about. It's what does it mean today? And economics is certainly one of the issues that communities, is on the top of the radar screen for most communities, economic welfare and economic opportunities. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that would be
It
considered.
came up at town meeting in connection with solar, where you can and can't place it and what kind of standards you can apply to it. So that's where the question comes from. Thank you.
Okay, this is way down towards the end. I don't think you mean defective date. I think you mean effective date.
Oh, right.
Where
Unless you really want to, it's number 5.
defective date. Ooh, what a typo.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things we really ask of you and staff and everything is to, having another set of eyes on this, because as you know, when you read the same document for 100 times, some words just, I've read that a million times. It always said effective to me, but.
Reading it the first time, my eyes turned
Yeah.
crossing.
So anything any of you can help on tweaking and catching typos and grammar would be very, very appreciated.
This seemed to be the same, it's been reformatted and made much clearer by what you've done, but it seems to be the same as what we had, except that 240-227, continuance and repealer kind of dropped out, and I
did.
couldn't tell whether that's important or not.
We had this discussion at the last meeting, and Brian was at the last meeting, and Frank Duffy was here. And for Bob, Richie, and I, we actually had a very, very difficult time even understanding what the heck that was saying. It was just almost incomprehensible. So that was our initial take. And then Brian and Frank said, well, they were unaware of that phrase ever being referenced in more than 30 years. And so combining those two things, I don't think, it was the consensus of the board to take that out. So I've moved that into, I'm keeping a matrix of what's been repealed, what's proposed to be deleted. So I've moved that into that matrix and with the reason that I just discussed.
Will there at some point be a crossover chart of where a new, I don't know whether you'd base it on the old one, going from the old one to the new one, or the new one to the old one, of what was there and where it fits now? It's just a transitional document, but it would be helpful.
I don't think we were.
Okay?
Yes.
And to make an analogy, one of the problems with the metric system was people trying to convert from inches to centimeters.
Right.
If you don't care to convert, you're just using the new system, then you really don't need that transitionary sort of thing. That's my take on it. And I'm happy to have people differ.
So, two things, I guess. One is, it's not as simple as saying Section 240-130 is now Section, Article, whatever, I'm just making numbers up here, but
Yep. Article
3, Section 240-130 is now in Article 2, Section 12, because a fair amount of one of the problems with your bylaw is you have not only sections, that are an accumulation of unrelated items. You have paragraphs that are an accumulation of unrelated items. And we've, as you may recall, when we did our PowerPoint, we're disaggregating all of that and moving it to the right point. So it's not just moving section 130, it's moving the first two sentences of 130 over here, and the second paragraph over here. And so that would be an extraordinarily labor-intensive thing to do. And then my second point is, what did I do with Article 1? How did I lose Article 1 already? Well, that's weird.
Notes in the
Oh, here it
margin.
is. So, all of this, except the, except for track changes, and you see this on Article 2, is almost all existing language from the bylaw. Now, it doesn't show where it came from, but the message is, it's existing language. And where we are changing things, we will show it in track changes. And so for most of the articles that we're not doing substantive work on, it's almost all going to be existing language tweaked for grammatical and disaggregated. So I don't know if that helps at all, but it's not like we're redoing the whole bylaw.
The only place it would be a tremendous help, really, the biggest help, would be in convincing town meeting that substantively it's the same, it's just reformatted to make it easier to use. And we can point out the new parts. But people are going to look and say, where's this? And it will be hard to say.
I'm just reluctant because that's
No, I
such
can
a
see the
labor
reluctance,
intensive,
it's
it's not
just-
part of the scope. We're trying to get all of these articles done. We don't have a lot of time to get everything done. I think, I'd like to focus on getting the articles done and then see how much time we have. And maybe, if we can say, like Article 2 is almost, as we're gonna get to in a minute, is almost entirely existing language with
Right.
some tweaked language. If, do you have to tell, you have the good judgment of knowing your town. Do you have to tell everybody, well, this paragraph came from such and such, and that paragraph came from over here, and this paragraph came from over here? That's a pretty long document, because you're going to be doing it sometimes sentence by sentence, certainly paragraph by paragraph, and even more certainly section by section.
Yes, Pat?
Although I can see where Charlotte is coming from. No, because I did that originally with the first document that we got. Going back through our bylaws and trying to figure out where all of this came from. And my feeling is that there's going to have to be a degree of trust of town meeting that we have thoroughly reviewed it and understand it. And those who have question, I think, would do the same kind of thing that I did. Take the old bylaw and find out themselves. Because if they don't trust us to have done this, the only way they're going to be satisfied, whether you do what Charlotte was saying, is for them to do it themselves.
Or to have a public hearing that has at least one part of it that focuses on that. Because we do have nitpickers, which is good. There are also nits that they can pick. So there'd be a couple of ways to address it. And I can see where a crossover chart would be at least as long as the document. But we need to think about
I'd
it.
like to point out how many people, the public, are interested in this.
That's right now. That's now. They don't even know we're really doing
But
this.
this is a public hearing for this, right?
Right.
This-
Well,
But
it's a
not
discussion
complete
now.
yet.
Not a hearing.
It's not a hearing.
It's not
Discussion.
complete yet.
Okay.
I'm assuming there will
Well,
be a hearing.
Let's keep that on hold and move on to 2. I'd like to
So
just,
if I could just add two quick comments. One is, just going on your suggestion about maybe picking one, the one section that has the most substantive change is the non-conforming section.
Right.
So maybe that's the section we really show, because we had to take, again, like much of your bylaw, you had non-conforming language kind of scattered around, so we brought it all together, and then we brought it up to date based on state statutes. So that might be a good one to pick, because that would have more. And then, of course, anybody looking at the bylaw, once it's on the website electronically, you can just go to find and type in what you're looking, and type in the
Right.
first sentence or something and see where that shows up.
Good point.
Anything else on Article 1? So, Article 2, Administration and Enforcement. As I said, this is a new draft with the new format, and you can see, we tried, as we've done all of them, how we formatted it and put titles in it, and, just made it a lot easier to read to begin with, whatever it is you're reading. And then just some tweaked language here and there in track changes, nothing real substantive, but
Yes,
I have two very brief comments.
Okay.
One is, I'm curious on violations. You have violations no more than $300 for each offense. Sometimes there's several violations, and I'm curious how that fits in with other bylaws in the Commonwealth.
it's by state statute, actually. So it's the same, if any bylaw has that language, it says the same thing. Or at
The
least
other
it
one
should.
is, on the planning board, membership, I think it's important to indicate the membership of the planning board in Falmouth is elected. Many towns are appointed.
Okay, we can, is there a consensus to do that?
Pat?
I have another, a number of comments. One is consistency, because titles is in one cap and then lowercase, and the rest are all caps. Lot frontage, submission of plans. So consistency of how you're doing it. Look under 240-2.1A, titles. That's like okay, if you make that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
See the consistency.
Yes, it
of
should be
form.
all lower caps. Titles should be all lower caps, right?
Either all low, however you do it, but then you
Yeah,
go down to lot frontage.
all you can see, all the rest of them are lower caps. That title should be that, yep.
Right,
Good,
okay.
thank you.
Now, under 1A, and this is on both A and B, it should be comma or instead of or comma at the end of the clause that you're doing.
Where are we at again?
Okay, 1A, a public way or a way which the town clerk certifies is maintained and used as a public way, or, comma, it should be comma, or.
Comma or, right,
And the next one is the same thing.
same way, yeah.
Comma, or. Then throughout, there's inconsistency in dates, whether you put the number before the month or the number after the month. In C, it's the number after the month, but in most places, it's been, so far, the number before the month. So you've got February 17 instead of 17 February. And that's just lifted, 1C, first one,
Right here, February
240-2.1.
Yeah, so, that's a good thing for us to look for, because all of the dates that are in the new draft are just taken exactly
I know
from
that.
the existing. So this is a chance to clean them up.
And I don't know whether you want me to send all this to you or make it easier for you, or you want to just,
No, whatever anybody could, on any of the articles, either the ones tonight or the ones from last September, have comments, changes, inconsistencies,
Okay.
red flags, whatever, we need to get those so we can incorporate those.
okay.
So perhaps it would be best if you sent those to Tom,
Yeah.
and then he could consolidate them
Oh, it
and
would be
email them
To you, yes.
and get them on to me. But, again, this is one of the things we probably didn't think about because we were just lifting language, and you're right, like everything else, it's really inconsistent in how you treat dates, and among other things that get treated very
What I
inconsistent.
didn't know is whether you were to that point yet or not.
Oh, yes, we're
Okay.
trying to, so one of the things you'll see, like if you go on to the to enforcement on the second page, down to violations, 2, non-criminal disposition. See at the end where we crossed out MGL C40, 21D, and we put in GL? That's a consistency, because your bylaw refers to Mass General laws in at least a half a dozen different ways. And so we picked up on that one quickly, and we're making it all, the reference, absolutely consistent throughout the entire bylaw.
Thank you. You answered one of my questions. Now, if you flip back to the other page, 240-2.1C, the second line, or, let's see, yes. The second line under occupancy permit required, there should be a comma after the word otherwise, I believe. So it reads, no building or structure shall be erected, comma, altered or changed as to construction or use under a permit or otherwise, comma, and no
Otherwise.
premises, because you've got another clause.
Right. Yep. And I just noticed it should be a comma after altered as well.
Aha, okay. Let's see. Okay, then you go under 240-2.3A. Fourth line down, and I don't understand it. Vacancies shall be filled for unexpected terms?
Unexpired.
Unexpired,
That's
thank
autocorrect being auto-incorrect.
That drives me nuts. The
Oh, yeah.
autocorrect.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Unexpired.
Are you a librarian?
no, I've just got a warped brain that just does things like this.
And we will be eternally grateful.
Good catch.
Now, the other thing is that I wonder, the board shall adopt rules and regulations not inconsistent. Why just say, just use consistent instead of not inconsistent?
Again, I'm happy to do that. It's just, that was a cut and paste of existing language.
Because when I see something like that,
It's a double
not
negative that,
language.
I agree. I
Okay,
just
so we're
put
gonna go
consistent.
consistent
yeah.
on that?
Charlotte, you had something?
I do, and actually, Pat's questions bring up a general question, and then I do have a more general question. Will there be like a final edit for comments and typos and that type of thing?
Sure, yes.
Good, okay,
But
then,
the more comments and typos and edits we can get as we're going through the drafts, the cleaner the final draft will be. But you'll
Oh.
get a final draft, yeah.
oh. Other thing, on this entire section, Article 2, it's great to see it right at the beginning of the book. I really think that that was a great idea on when you arranged your contents. I question the order in which the various offices are named. I would think a more logical order would have been to have begun with the planning board, considering it's elected and has the more general authority, and would work its way down through the ZBA to the building commissioner. It just seems to be upside down. If you were a citizen looking to our new zoning book, trying to understand how does this government work, is that where you would begin?
I don't have any great, preferences one way or another. Most bylaws usually start with the building commissioner because they're the ones that's most active in administering the bylaw and doing permits, but, if there's some other rationale like you just expressed as to which sequence you want them,
Well,
it's
partially the
entirely up to
question
the board.
came from finding in a different area of the town rules, the business about the planning board and their authority. And I wonder if this should be authority, administration, and enforcement, and make the two consistent and complete.
That's that reference to section
it
300
is,
you mentioned.
yeah.
Well, that might be a good idea, but I really would be more comfortable if I found out what that document is first.
Right. Jim, maybe you know. It's off the town website, under Planning Board Rules and Regulations.
I'll be drilling down on that as we move on to the next one.
Yeah, I just,
May I
but,
have your hard copy, just for a moment?
yeah, when Jim gives it back, I'll give it to you. And because the place it would fit would be here.
Set it back down.
Tom? We don't have to decide now, but just,
You're left alone.
You want to
Yep.
continue?
Yeah, I would like to just keep moving. Yep.
Okay,
Well, just based on that comment, is there some other, do others feel like you'd like to have it reordered? Or how, if it's okay the way it is, or move the planning board ahead of the zoning board because you are elected, or?
because it's a hierarchy, and you just wonder where to begin on a hierarchy.
okay, I guess I'm not one for hierarchies very much, but I understand your comment on that. But this sent me for a mental spin too, because building commissioner / inspector, and then titles, all this is a definition that you're saying, okay, it's synonymous one with the other. That could just as easily be handled almost in a footnote, because what we're doing here is using it interchangeably in the body of what we're talking about. And if somebody has a question, that could just as easily be there, but I thought, well, administration, okay, the administration of the bylaws, the administration referring to people, that word can be used in two different ways, but then we went into designating building inspector or building commissioner are the same, regardless of what you call that person. And I'm not quite sure how to handle that. And is that because we simply just flip it around and throughout our bylaws? So we just determine building commissioner and then,
Well, could I add to the point? Because the section under building commissioner only says that one part about a title, whereas the sections under zoning board of appeals and planning board give their authorities and powers, what they're actually doing. Whereas the building commissioner, who does a lot, it doesn't mention what he's doing. So that parallel construction isn't quite there.
I agree, but again, for all of these other articles, our task was to do as little as possible with them, except to not get into substantive things. So, and I don't know where exactly you go from non-substantive to substantive along that, but,
Or where you go from trying to make a document that's truly useful to people trying to get something built, to just reformatting what we already have and is incomplete and redundant and has a number of problems, but incompleteness is one of its problems, and this seems a good place to give more information. I don't know if there's any other agreement here.
I guess I'm not sure what you would want to have listed under the building commissioner section.
Well, here under zoning board of appeals, it says, under what authority we have one, and then it says, the positions you could find there, and what any person aggrieved by this decision, what you can do, and what they will do, and what the process will be, so that you get a general idea of what the zoning board of appeals is there for. This is like, it's not a job description, but it's close to a general description of what their authorities are. And the same, although more abbreviated, under the planning board, but under the building commissioner, who has as much work to do, that information isn't given. And then building permit, which he does in fact give, isn't, it's connected by the numbering system, but that's all, and hops immediately to lot frontage, of one of many things that will be a consideration in getting a building permit.
Well, see,
So it's-
there's a distinction here that's, I think it's an important distinction. Most of the powers of a building inspector come from the state building code, not from zoning. Whereas the planning board and the zoning board, your authority and powers comes from the zoning statutes. So, the building commissioner has, under the state building code, an endless list of authorities, and, people that want to know what the building commissioner does really needs to talk to the building department. I don't think that the zoning code is the place to put the building code's authority,
Even if
listings.
it were a reference to that where they could find it, it would add the information available. I guess it depends on what we think we're doing.
Well, I myself think it's all right to start with the building commissioner as far as like order and everything, because that's the first stop, and when he makes decisions, you gotta get, if you ever filed for a permit, he hinges the form and tells you all the places you gotta go.
Doesn't say that, though.
That's what happens when you go for a building permit, they give you a big checklist of all the departments, the order, where you have to get done.
I understand. I'm just saying it doesn't include that.
Well, if we start with there, they hand it to you when you show up at the front desk, so. I think there's one thing on the planning board, I don't know about powers, but one of the things we do now, we didn't do in the old bylaw, is this doesn't say, or did it's there and I don't see it, anything about design review? We used to have a design review board. We don't have them anymore.
Right.
We found out they were not kosher with the open meeting laws.
Oh, okay.
So we had to make some quick changes, so we pulled it back quickly on a town meeting article a couple years ago
Right.
and gave the responsibility to the planning board, and it should be in here, I think.
Well, that can just be added to B. It
Yes.
should be the site plan.
It's site plan and
review
design review. It just
And
needs to.
design review.
yeah,
Okay,
just
we'll add
The
that.
words "and design review" is what I'm looking for,
Mm.
yeah.
Okay.
That's easy. So,
We're trying to make a more transparent document, though.
mhm.
And to keep the building commissioner section as it is, very opaque.
I agree.
So I suppose the simplest possible way to indicate where further information might be available or where it fits in the process would help with that.
Well, we can look into that and see what we might be able to draft that kind of can accomplish something like that without being too
Right, perhaps another town has
misleading or
solved the
too
problem.
expansive or, I don't know. I actually haven't ever seen that in a zoning bylaw, so I'll have to think about it some.
Which begs the question, should the building commissioner / inspector even be mentioned in this section, except as it is that giving certain permits?
Oh, surely it should be mentioned.
I don't know.
I would say yes, because it's that way now, and the reason why it's that way now is both in the bylaw and in general, and probably another thing, the building inspector and the building commissioner names get used interchangeably all over the place, and this just says, okay, in this bylaw, they are synonymous. So people don't think they're two different positions.
Mhm.
And
Okay, then my question in regard to what Charlotte was saying though too, is the order of which, I could care less whether it's zoning board or planning board that is first in order. It doesn't matter to me. But then I would see, since this is just so very brief about what the building commissioner does, that simply be put at the end. That throughout this document, they're used synonymously, those terms are used synonymously.
I mean, the end of this section?
Yeah, but then you're reading this throughout and you're wondering, wait a minute, are these two different entities? Unless we make them the same. It's confusing to me.
It is confusing, but it seems if the traditional place for the building commissioner / inspector to be in the zoning book is right here at the beginning. That's fine, it's tradition, great. People are expecting it, but it should say more about that role. Tom, what do
Like
you
saying
think?
he's the chief zoning enforcement officer for the town, that's what he is, that is his role.
Issues their building permits. It wouldn't take a big sentence.
And
What-
for-
I wanted to point out that as several of us have had conversations, individual conversations, the building commissioner is the arbiter of the zoning bylaw. So if we decide to write a zoning bylaw that says, dogs will be blue, it's the building commissioner's job to determine if that dog is blue or not. So he's the arbiter of our zoning bylaw. So it's been my history, whenever we're looking at writing a zoning bylaw and making some changes, we have a concept and we write things down that we think it is. I always want to bring that to the building commissioner, make sure he understands what our intent is, and the words are written the way he's going to interpret them. So the building commissioner is preeminent in the zoning bylaw, because he's going to be the one who says, that's what your bylaw means. So I would certainly keep him forefront and keep that.
Right, so let's leave the issue of the order aside now. We're, I think, in general agreement on that. How do you feel about even putting in your statement, he is the arbiter and the issuer of the zoning bylaw and issues building permits? It doesn't seem difficult.
Well, if we get back to the intent of rearranging the language, I guess that gets into, does that need a tweak to the extent?
Well, if you, aside from which sequence this is, we can add, I'm just saying a list for now, of activities of the building commissioner associated with zoning.
And his role, he's the arbiter of.
Well,
yeah.
that would fall under my broad
Oh,
category.
okay, great.
That's my term, by the
But
way.
I thought we had resolved the order issue in favor of the order that you have, which we did. So that statement would go here under building commissioner, that list.
Okay, we'll draft something up
okay?
and we'll get, you'll see it the next time.
Pat, you-
Yeah, I've got follow-up. Under 240-2.3A, 3, the very last line, it should be the Board of Appeals.
As opposed to the Board of Appeals?
Yep. Then, under number 4B, remove the period after permit.
Oh, right, yeah.
Now, there's something else, and I don't know how to fix it, otherwise I'd make a suggestion. But it's under 5A, any person aggrieved by reason of their. You've got the singular person and the plural their.
Well, Bob Ritchie and I had a long discussion about that, and we've had a long discussion with a whole bunch of other people that write things, and this is what we got back. In today's writing environment, there works better than his/her.
A
That's what I
gender-neutral
figured
pronoun.
was gonna be the answer to
There
it.
you go.
And so we have to leave it that way, even though it's.
I know some people cringe and other people think it's, the modern way to say things, so.
Yeah, well. 240-2.3B, 2, powers. I'd like to change that, if the planning board shall act on any matter authorizing it to do so, instead of any matter it is authorized to do so.
Okay. Correct?
Any matter authorizing it.
To do so, yeah. Yep.
One last thing.
Sure.
On the final page of this section, E, in red, does this mean that something gets turned down by town meeting, and it can be refiled within 2 years of that denial? Can it be refiled at the very next town meeting, and the subsequent one, it just has to be within the next 2 years?
So, if town meeting denies a zoning amendment, it cannot come back to town meeting, the same amendment, within 2 years, unless the planning board recommends it the second time around, before town meeting. So if they came back within 1 year, if they wanted to come back within 1 year, they'd have to get the planning board's blessing, if you will, to go to town meeting.
I
And-
think that's happened once, Charlotte, since I've been on the board.
Just wondered.
Yeah.
That's what it's saying.
That's a state statute.
Okay.
It doesn't, you're right, it doesn't happen often, but we try to put this in the bylaws because when we bring it up with towns, everybody goes, what's a repetitive petition? And then we explain it, and we say, well, it's better to have it in the bylaws so somebody can point to it.
And that keeps that same person from bringing the same thing back over and over again.
Right.
But at the same time, it enables the planning board itself to bring something back.
We can approve it. It
If you have a
basically
favorable
If you,
that law
if you
doesn't apply to
recommend
us.
it, again, you can
Right.
keep bringing it back over and over again, I guess. I hadn't thought about that. Anything else on that one? So, Article 3, definitions. The only thing on this one, the definition section is the same, except we put in a placeholder, and you all probably remember the conversation about some people wanted it sequenced one way, and some people want it sequenced the other, so somebody said, well, what about if we do an index? So we developed an index.
Very nice.
All the terms, all the topic categories are listed.
Thank you.
And my vote would be, put it in.
That's my question.
That's a good idea.
But we're not hearing from that end of the table.
You're doing a great job.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
So,
I won't even come close to commenting at your level. Just keep doing it.
He can-
Paul, you had something?
Yeah, next page, I have two questions.
oh, sure, okay, yeah.
Which page is the next page?
Yeah, which,
Oh, I got a lot of them.
Are we on,
Okay.
are we in definitions or?
Any definitions?
On the adult-related things, I was just curious. This is state law, the minimum 15% of the stock has to be determined to be adult? That comes through 3 different times in that question there.
I would
I'm
check
curious
it,
why
but my
15.
battery just died on my computer. But I'm guessing it's probably state law because this wasn't adopted all that long ago, was it, yeah,
I
and
think most of
so
those places,
probably reflects just the language of the state statute.
most of those places, so I've been told, have a lot more than 15%. I was just curious. And related to that is, in the following page, we have farm-related business, nursery. And one of the things we were struggling with,
Yes.
what constitutes a nursery? If that
Right.
15% applies, should that also apply, maybe nursery growing stock has to be 15% of the nursery?
So nursery is one of the items on the to-do list. You know, there was, you all mentioned a court case. Brian was gonna get the court case. We were gonna talk to Frank. I'm just not familiar enough with what the court case was and whatnot, but I got different feedback from different people. I talked about how to define nursery, and I think it's also connected to contractor yards in some way.
yeah.
So that's on the to-do list of, we need to get, probably Rod and Frank and Tom and whatnot, and us in the same room at the same time to decide what we need to write here, both in the definition section and in the use table, where nursery is listed as a new use as to how it has to be treated in the use table. So that's what that stands.
Well, I'm painfully aware of that because I was cross-examined for 55 minutes during that trial, and it was unnecessary, frankly. The final point I have in this area is you have bees as a category in agricultural and farming. Number of people have beehives behind their homes. Wouldn't necessarily be an agricultural area. And I don't know whether that should be considered or just cross it out.
So having a chicken in your backyard or some bees in your backyard is not farming under the state statute. So, it's up to the town, you can see farm as a parcel of 5 acres or 2 acres if you sell enough. Beyond that, it's up to the town as to how to treat small, you know, keeping the livestock or farm animals, or, you know, whether it's keeping a goat in the backyard or beehives, and I'm not sure that the town does treat that in any way specifically, but the language you have of farming is from the state statutes relate to a real farm.
Wouldn't touch it.
I mean, once you take it out, then sure enough, somebody is gonna wanna put bees in, and then there's gonna be beehive activity over whether they can do it or not. So I think you leave as much in as possible. I wouldn't take anything out.
And this doesn't apply to backyard beehives, it applies to businesses that are generating some income,
Right.
all commercial.
Then should we add the commercial keeping of bees
Well, but it,
and the commercial keeping of fur-bearing animals? Because the others all have verbs with them. Because if you just have it as bees and fur-bearing
Oh, I
animals.
see, bees, yeah. The keeping of,
oh,
But are we talking about the commercial
you
keeping?
think these could be passerby bees?
Well, no, if we're talking about agriculture or farming, and it was brought up that people have bees, maybe even more than one hive in their backyards that they're keeping. But the purpose here is commercial.
I think what's happened here is that a list that included the phrase "as a commercial enterprise" has been divided into several bullets. So the bees got separated from commercial enterprise.
Just like keeping of horses as a commercial enterprise is up there,
Right.
or horses as a
But it-
commercial enterprise.
Would you rather see them all turned into a single sentence, or repeat commercial enterprise after each one? That seems
Well,
overdoing
but-
it.
You know what we could do?
Put commercial enterprise up at the
very
beginning.
end. Mm-hmm. And take it out of keeping of horses as a commercial enterprise.
Well, isn't a farm, anybody, it's 5 acres, right? To be considered a farm? You don't have to, you can have 5 acres and farm it and not be commercial.
Right. True.
So,
Okay.
I'm worried about changing anything with farming.
yeah,
Isn't there a right to farm law
yes.
yeah.
that says that we can't, they have the right to do it? What is that?
Well, so if you look under the definition of farm, where it talks about the 5 acres or the 2 acres with a certain amount of sales, that is the definition of what you have to have in order to cross into the threshold of being a right to farm, being a right to farm. And basically, the state statute says you can't prohibit that or unreasonably restrict it in any way, farming operations. So that's, and again, it doesn't say commercial operation, because as just mentioned, you could have presumably you could have a 5 acre farm and not be running a commercial operation, but, so that's one category that's basically exempt by state statute. And then the other category of, farming under quotes is what, we've been talking about, having bees in the beehives in the backyard, or having a pygmy goat in the backyard, or things like that. That's not farming. So many communities have their own separate regulations, often Board of Health regulations and not even zoning regulations. And I don't know if your Board of Health has any regulations or not. I haven't heard this conversation before. So you do have to be cautious about how things get written. Bob Ritchie wrote this. Some of this, a lot of this is existing language, but Bob used to be the counsel for the State Agricultural Department. So he's he knows everything about how far you can go and what you can say and all.
We better leave it as is.
So, I mean, I think, but I think just for consistency's sake, from a grammatical point of view, your point is well taken, that bees just stands there alone as opposed to everything else is the
So does
keeping of, or
fur-bearing
the production of, or something.
So
So-
does the next one down for bearing animals.
Yeah, fur-bearing animals, yeah, what is that, it's just a standalone noun, what does
Yeah,
that
so it's
actually
the
mean?
keeping of, or the raising of. or-
Raising of, yeah, okay, yeah, so,
And then after any forestry or lumbering operation, put a period. That wasn't there because a clause followed it that now has
Right.
become a sentence, and it's much better that way.
She is very good.
terrific.
She is very good. By the way, if I may, Chapter 174 of the town code is the right to farm. So we are a right to farm community, so I believe we were, but I don't like to make stuff up, so I looked it up. Chapter 174, right to farm, and it goes on to discuss legislative intent and purpose and things like that. So as Brian and others have pointed out, not everything needs to be in zoning that we do. I think the wetlands and the signs are two of those examples we've had historically in the town.
We briefly go back, and nobody needs to turn the page except you. 240-3.3 definitions, abandonment. And after abandonment, on the second line down, there's a period and it should be a comma.
So,
At the very end there,
yeah,
okay?
Abandonment.
second line.
There was a
Right at the
period, but-
end.
Okay.
It
So
should
make
be
that into a comma, it should be a
period.
comma.
And Pat, you said at the end of any forestry or lumbering operation, you'd want a period because, so what follows that? I missed.
Well, this used to be a clause. It went on, are performed by a farmer,
Right.
but then it's become a sentence. These are activities.
Okay, so
Okay, so-
you've changed the beginning of that. It isn't
No,
just this,
I didn't, it
then
became changed.
that
so
list of all those things performed by a farmer. Okay,
It has to
so,
be period right
okay,
there to put it
okay.
into it. Okay.
Point of information, there doesn't seem to be a definition for farm in our in our current zoning bylaw. Where did all this come from?
I'm pretty sure we have a definition for farm
You think
in
so?
the current bylaw. Give me just a moment.
A, B, C, D,
Is
E,
it,
F.
Either in the definition section or in the agricultural section?
No, it doesn't seem to be in either one unless I've just plain missed it. Really possible.
In,
Agriculture is 240-34, it begins at.
so in 24163-1, under definitions, farm parcel, farm-related business.
240 where?
24163-1, there are definitions for farm parcel and farm-related business.
That's been some of the problem, Charlotte, is definitions were stuck into some of the bylaws instead of being part of.
So, so farm, the definition of farm parcel, which is what you have now, was expanded because it didn't meet the updated state statutes. So, state statute. So, the 5 acres you have, which is here, but the 2 acres has been added since your bylaw, so it got expanded. And then farm business is farm business.
And the rest of this stuff under 241-63 and so forth all went somewhere else?
That, yes, that's one of the sections you haven't seen yet. And that language is going to be moved into,
Something else.
The table of uses.
It will be under agriculture.
it will be under agriculture. It will have its own separate, it'll be a subsection, but it will have its own category.
Yeah.
If you go down to farm-related business in that first line, a business operated on a farm parcel, comma, related, and you need to insert the word to. Related to or
Or
supportive
supportive
of.
of, okay.
And then, of course, I've got my comment, does one tree make a nursery?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
At the bottom of that page, recreational trailer or vehicle, this includes, comma, but is not limited to comma. There's no, this includes but is not limited to, there should be a comma
Not
there.
limited to, okay, yeah,
Travel trailers.
yeah, okay.
And all the other things that followed on the next page. Truck campers, camping trailers, motorized campers, the list.
We limit in here the vehicular stacking area to those waiting service at drive-through windows. But there may be others and I'm thinking specifically of people were concerned about queuing at the car wash that was being proposed and how they might go out onto the road if there were too many of them. So should we limit it to a drive-through window? That's what we normally think of as queuing.
And that's, so again, my standard answer here, that's your existing language, and it's tied to the fact that you have other language about, having to get a permit for a drive-through window. You don't have another language in the bylaw that I'm aware of about other incidents where the business, like if you had just opened up a marijuana store, you'd have a lot of stacking and queuing going on in town.
But it
do you
could
do
be a
for car
service bay
washes?
too.
Yeah, well, that was the point there for the
Yeah, the car wash.
The car wash,
Yeah.
right,
queuing at a service bay.
yeah.
But this is something new we're dealing with, and it's not in our current bylaws.
So what's your suggestion?
We can simply say, remain in their vehicles awaiting service, period, instead of at a drive-through window.
Right, yeah.
And
Just put
remove
drive-through
at a
service.
drive-through window. I don't know how anybody would feel about that if we're actually changing the bylaw sufficiently.
I would come at it slightly different. I would leave drive-through window in there because it does, refer back to language you have in the bylaw, but I'd just add, or other service.
Yeah.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, and go down to building area, the second bullet point, and remove the comma after and.
One-story open
Right.
porches,
Yep.
One-story open porches, semicolon, and.
nuke to comma.
And then you go down to building height, B, third line down. There's duplication here.
There's whoops.
To the highest point of. That's in there twice.
Highest point
So if you
of-
go down
Yeah.
on B, the third line, and after of, remove to the highest point of,
I'm lining out the first highest point, because
whichever one, it doesn't matter.
it just, sentence looks better.
Where am
Right here on B,
That whole clause, to
Point
the
of,
highest point of, was duplicated.
yeah, page 4.
Oh, yeah, to the highest point of. So you only need one of those, okay. Okay.
I don't want to jump ahead if other people have other comments on.
On height, further down, height limitations shall apply to any extension of the structure that are should it be any extensions?
You're right. Mhm.
I'm sorry, where was that?
Height limitation.
Paragraph after B, in
Yeah.
height limitations shall apply to any extensions
Right?
of the structures that are integral to the,
It says that.
It says extension, not plural.
Singular instead of
extension.
plural.
Plural, oh, okay, oh, okay. Yep, okay.
Then, we go over to the next page.
Oh,
you've got
yeah,
more? I'm
I got
sorry.
one more. On principal structure, the sentence says, "The structure in which the primary use of the lot is conducted, including porches, patios, decks, utility buildings, and any other attached projections of the structure." I would like to see it read more porches, decks, and attach projections and utility builds. I want to attach utility buildings to the principal structure, because the way I could see somebody saying that is, oh, well, a utility building can also be a principal structure. I want to make sure that utility building is attached. And I don't really know how to, I'd have to,
It's implied. It says any other attached projections.
yes, but it says utility buildings and any other, I don't know, my mind separated out utility building from that. To me, it wasn't clear. I would think you'd want to unite utility building and attached projection.
Couldn't you say utility structure? Because it may not be a building, it
Yeah.
could be.
Yeah, I just don't want that utility building section to read, someone could take that and say that, oh, that's my principal structure too, because we just dealt with that.
Could you say any other attached projections or utility buildings of the structure?
Yeah, just so it's worded so that you know that that utility structure is attached to the primary structure.
So Bob, that would have to come in before projections. So it would have to be any other attached utility building,
Or
I
project,
think, or other projections
or other
of the
projections, okay.
structure.
Or you could call it a covered utility. You want it to be not a separate building, right?
Right, it's gonna be, it has to be attached to the principal structure. Let's see. Decks and any other attached projections and utility buildings?
No,
What?
because that still segregates it, Bob. So the way I
Yeah,
suggest it is
that's right.
decks and any other attached utility building or other attached projection,
Yeah. Yeah,
projection of the structure.
yeah.
And I think that should take care of your concern there.
Yeah. I always spelled story the English way with an EY, too.
I do too.
Yeah.
So if we go further down under structure, the second paragraph, we made some changes originally, and I don't see them here, so I'm gonna read what I think we did back. A structure includes, comma, but is not limited to, comma, scratch out the two, tennis or similar sports courts, semicolon, swimming pools, and we scratched out if more than 24 inches deep or 250 feet square in area. And we put in swimming pools as defined in Massachusetts State Building Code 780, is it CMR 780 or 780 CMR?
780 CMR.
780 CMR, and we put that in.
Right.
And then semicolon, gas or liquid storage tanks, if principally above ground, semicolon, but not including retaining walls or fences. And then I have a question mark here. Did we want to put a height limitation on retaining walls, and after a certain height, it becomes a structure?
Well, walls and fences are 6 feet before you need a permit.
Okay. So that's covered under the building
That's
code?
covered under the building code.
Okay, so we don't need to do that. So that's a change that we kind of made late in the evening the last time, and,
Yeah. Yeah, because that was Rod that brought that up.
yeah, So did you get that, Bob, or not? Or,
Yes, I did. I think I have it written down
okay,
from last time, and somehow I didn't get everything up to date. Here we go. Here's my notes from last
And on our to-do list, under structures, the discussion about different structure definitions with Rod Palmer had some questions and
Yeah,
suggestions.
so that was another one.
So awaiting follow-up
Add a little
information.
more.
Yep, yep.
Okay. And then under structure substantial damage, the second line, it should be for hyphen damaged. The hyphen is needed in there to before damaged.
Where are you at, Pat?
Okay, damage of any origin sustained by a structure whereby the cost of restoring the structure to its before hyphen
Oh,
damaged
right, before damage condition.
condition.
I have a tough time applying market value to that.
Yeah. Yeah, how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it used to
Finish
be
with
the
that page?
I am.
area.
Jim?
Got some stuff on it?
Well, I'll give you a break.
Well, I'm concerned about the word market value, too. In other areas, we've used the assessed value,
Mm-hmm.
and that has, if there's an argument about it, there's a policy where the applicant goes out and gets their own assessor, and then the two assessors agree. I mean, and that's used all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Can we use assessed value instead of market value? Because the assessors,
Although the assessed value is usually less, so you're gonna hit that 50%.
oh, I know, it is less.
Faster, yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I just have a problem with using a value as opposed to the percentage of the building.
Mm.
I think this is one we'd have to talk to Rod about, because most bylaws have this, some kind of provision like this in it, and it's always the building commissioner that's the one making some kind of determination if somebody says, 50, this is 50% of my market value, or this is my assessed value, which is 50%.
Do other towns go by value?
Yes, that's very common. Now, the question, what I don't know what the split is between those that use assessed value and those that use market value. But that's extremely common. And even in like FEMA and, damages.
And ADA compliance as well.
ADA compliance, it's a very common way of,
Because am
Creating
I
a
wrong, or am I
threshold.
just going back too far, where it used to be based on the square footage of the structure? That if 50% of it, if it went beyond 50%, you had to bring the whole thing up to
You
code.
do see that one as well.
Uh,
But obviously, this is existing language, so
Yeah.
whether it's ever been used, I don't know.
Yeah,
But I think maybe Rod could weigh in on this a little bit. and-
where does substantial damage come in? Where does it get applied?
In the velocity zones.
In the velocities?
For the purposes of this definition, in velocity zones, substantial improvement also includes any additions, improvements, alterations, and combinations thereto.
I'm more familiar with the assessed value and the process of that, but
Well, there's even more that Rod wants to see some
Yeah.
kind of a change on, and that's because people do 50% and then they wait
Yeah.
for the calendar to flip and
Right.
they've got to come back in.
yeah.
He'd rather see it done all at once and forget the flip, waiting for the calendar year to flip.
Yeah.
And so I think it may be more of a substantial change than we can handle here that needs to be accomplished.
yeah, he really should be here when we're doing this, because this
And
this is his gig.
And I would like to point out that I did talk to Rod earlier, and he told me he had an obligation he could not get out of to be at this meeting, so.
But we're gonna have another shot at it. I think this is important, because it really impacts the flood areas of our town and the renovations. So there's a renovation going on Mill Road that I know that he's talking about. It's been going on for 2 years or 3 years, and he's doing a little bit and a little bit, incremental.
Yeah.
And he wanted to give some relief to that. I don't know if we do. I mean, part of the reason we have this is
Okay.
we want people to upgrade,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we're now giving a way around it, a workaround. to
But I
our-
think we need to get his input.
We gotta
on
get his
how-
input and then
he
decide what
sees.
we wanna do. Because
Okay.
there's both the language and how it's actually used.
Right.
And I think that's important.
It's probably more, Jim, than we should or can accomplish here. Because that's something that is gonna have to go for.
And Duffy should be here on
Yeah.
that too, because it's
Larger
big. It
change.
sounds like a little thing, but it's really big.
And, and it's just in this zone.
Right,
So, you know, does it apply if your house burns down in Hatchville?
no,
No,
not at all.
so,
You got,
Look at this from a policy perspective. This is one of the conversations that Rod and I had previously. If we're looking at coastal vulnerability and resilience, how much do we want to encourage people to keep making substantial improvements on a piece of property that's in the velocity zone, that area that is subject to being destroyed and damaged? That's why it's the velocity zone.
yeah.
So at some point, it's a policy question.
It is definitely a policy.
And to use value in that area, those places are waterfront that have extremely high
Right.
values. One room is worth, $500,000. So it's really a complicated issue. And that's,
so we probably need to just leave this as it is for our purposes now. It's much bigger.
okay,
So we'll rendezvous with Rod and Frank, but I think this may be one of those policy things that you might have to wait till phase 2 of this, or a separate document rather than putting it in this piece if there's,
yeah, we really don't want to be sliding, if we're passing this off as,
Rearranging the chairs.
rearranging things and slipping in a policy, that's
Yeah, we can't do
disingenuous. That would
that.
be not a good thing. I agree that this should be set aside
Yeah.
and done separately.
you know, we're putting together a list of things that
Right.
comes up that say that's a policy question for later on, so, but we
I-
should start that conversation now.
That's not part of this exercise.
No, I don't. see
And we
how
might
it
need to
can
be done, but it's not part of, this is
Right.
not the place to do it. That's what
Right.
you were saying.
That's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
I got
yeah.
you, yeah, I'm in agreement.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just one other follow-up. This afternoon, when Frank and I met, I offered him one of my cold meds. He had his own, but he was going to bed.
Okay.
Uh,
I'm not
I'm
criticizing.
just with you. I know that,
Well, to tell you the truth, I was so much involved in other things, getting ready for this meeting, I didn't even pay attention to this because of comments with you, so.
Yep. yes, we've had a lot of conversations here the
And
last
no one's
couple
here
of days.
with the whole
Yep.
thing, so. I've spent hours on the phone on other issues that are not relevant.
Very well.
Paul?
Page 6. There's 2 Scribner's errors there, which you've probably seen already. Last line in drive-through establishments, N is double N. And common ownership, it's core instead of more.
So we got 2 N's and in at the end of drive-through establishments. And what was the other one, sir?
2 ends in where?
Yeah, drive-through establishments, in.
Oh, in, oh.
And
Could be a drive-through in, I suppose.
I'm just curious, on drive-through
Oh,
window,
cut
whether you want
one,
to add the ATM to that.
Well, that would be a customer service facility, a drive-up ATM, I would think.
We could, I mean, if people thought that would help clarify it, we could add that. That's pretty simple.
Without limitation, oh, so added into the, with that limitations.
Then on the following page, where it says density, the housing structures per unit of land, I wonder if we should designate the units. Per
Where
square
are
foot,
you?
per acre, or
Where are you?
Yeah.
density on the next page, page 7.
There's another one on the page you were just on,
Density.
there,
Our new definition.
right here.
What was your suggestion, Paul? What was your suggestion again?
Well, normally use
Per acre is what we usually,
Mhm.
per acre, what we normally
and
use.
this is,
Mhm.
Be square foot, but per acre would be
Right,
easily converted.
so it'd
Yeah.
be per acre of land instead
Yep.
of per unit of
Sure.
land.
And the other issue is these flood insurance maps, I think we have to just use the latest numbers if we can in this next section.
The flood insurance maps is one of those to do. There was a lot of discussion at the last meeting, You know, somebody, I think on the zoning board, recommended the most up-to-date maps. Brian pointed out the most up-to-date maps have not been adopted by the town. And he was gonna talk to the Conservation Commission and to see what maps they're using. And didn't you, was that one of the notes you gave me tonight?
No,
No, it's coastal dune. Nope. No. So, different documents in town seem to have different references to maps and
we
whether
just need
they're
to-
adopted or not. I don't know, you know, Brian was kind of the expert on that, so that's in discussion, is the best I can tell you right now.
Well, the other thing is too, that if this is a long-lived document, we're gonna have and any successor maps.
That's right, floodplain district, I was wondering we should put a date, but maybe you should say the latest.
Latest and greatest and any successors.
There's something, because there should be some tight end, some date, but you hate to put a date in because that's changing all the time.
And there are people who will make an argument that say, somebody else changed your zoning by updating a map that isn't subject to your zoning. So I know some of the conversations we had in other, previous town I worked in was, what's that date for the flood maps? And the new flood maps come in, then we go back to town meeting and change them again, so they are consistent.
Yeah, that's the first question, you know, if you go from this flood map to that flood map, what's the impact of that on people's properties in certain areas of town? And you kind of have to be ready to answer that question.
It's changing.
It will change.
If you go back to page 6 before we,
But the flood maps are adopted by the town as a specific date. The dates on our current map are, like, was it July 20th, 2013? There's a specific date on it when it was adopted. And it's done, I think it's done at town meeting.
Right,
So
yeah.
it's whenever it's adopted, it should be applied to the
Well,
bylaw.
there were further flood maps of Falmouth go to 92 and 86. And I was under the impression they were updated.
They are.
Yeah,
So
2013.
the dates there don't
2013.
make, I just raised it, we need to address that issue.
yeah,
I don't have an answer.
I
right now.
forget if it's July or August, it's 2013.
And the final
Seems
comment
like
is,
a long
under
time ago.
dune, we have a naturally occurring accumulation. I saw somewhere else it could be man-made too, and I don't know where I
Yeah,
saw
I
that.
saw that
was
too.
the
It was
question.
in here.
No, it was in the to-do list.
that was from last
Oh,
time, and
to-be
it's in the
list, okay.
to-do
I
list.
think it was
And
added.
we have an answer. I think.
And
Yes.
I got one piece of homework, no, actually several pieces of homework done, but not all my homework. So we did have a conversation, and thank you very much, Jennifer McKay, for making time for me to have this conversation about dunes. So we looked at what is in, what the Conservation Commission uses, both in 310 CMR, the Department of Environmental Protection, and in FWR, the Falmouth Wetland Regulations. They call it coastal dune, and that is that definition that I provided for you in the bold blue, which is any natural hill, a mound or ridge of sediment landward of the coastal beach deposited by wind action or storm overwash. Coastal dune also means sediment deposited by artificial means in serving the purpose of storm damage and prevention or flood control. So if that was our definition of dune, it would be consistent with our wetland regulations and with Massachusetts 310 CMR.
Because if you go to Minot Beach, you see all the dunes we build there.
Just a question. Sorry, you had a.
Oh, that's okay.
Ron, you got something? I saw you move.
You were shivering.
Putting my coat on.
Yeah.
I'm going back to page 6, there's just a little bitty one under family child care home. 1, 2, 3, the 4th line down, the second word in. Take the S off of homes, so it becomes care home receives. You have to have a singular home to receive.
Fourth line down?
4th line down. Starts out care homes receives, so to make it consistent.
Oh, family care home. Sorry, I was looking at child care facility. So family care home, fourth line,
The child care
right under
homes.
7 years of age. So the child care home.
Home, and you take the S off of it. Receives for temporary custody.
Oh, okay, yeah, plurals and singulars.
And if we are lopping over to page 8, under mean sea level, top of page 8, definition. Also having that conversation with Jennifer today, she said that the CONSCOM doesn't use mean sea level in their interpretations of things, but the datum that's referred in here, datum of 1929, what we use currently is NAV 82. That's currently used, it was adopted in 1993. And I think in our homework, it was discuss whether to rewrite or eliminate it. So the vertical datum we use now is NAVMD, National Geographic Vertical Datum of 1988.
Well, should it be eliminated if that was the question?
When I did a search of our code for mean sea level, the only place mean sea level occurred in the town's code was in 24133, meaning when we define whenever mean sea level appears, it shall be the mean sea level data. But I don't see it anywhere else in our code other than under base flood elevations. Base flood elevation levels are measured in feet above mean sea level. So I think that datum of 1988 would be what you want to use versus the 1982.
Does that say, that doesn't give a date. It's only in the definition it has the date.
Correct.
So you could, well, you could, the way, these things are almost the same, base flood elevation in, so if you just added the date to the main section of the bylaw where it's referenced, you wouldn't actually need the definition unless you want to duplicate it.
Yeah, so you could add the previous page where you have main base flood elevation level, add to the end of that sentence the reference to the datum of 1988.
Or just leave it. Mean sea level is sort of in common usage, and it might become more and more meaningful as the waters rise.
So if we just correct the date.
Just correct the date and leave it.
Change
Okay.
the date.
Leave it as
All right.
is.
You okay?
Yeah, I didn't go through the rest of it.
That's okay.
What page are you on? I got
Well,
something
was just
coming up.
flipping and knowing that, I didn't look any further on
Oh.
this one.
That's where, I'm not even sure, I was expecting to get through all of the definitions tonight, but
Oh.
if people have further comments, whatever you have now, and then if you
So
can.
why don't we go down the line? Paul, we'll go through all your comments right now, instead of waiting in order, just to keep this moving. 'Cause we're
You can make
jumping
comments as we
around.
go through this, that's all.
Well,
Well, we wanted to keep within sections because it makes it easier for us
all
to
right.
follow those. So we
Okay,
wanted-
quick comment on page 12, marijuana treatment centers. There's now recreational minus marijuana centers in the Commonwealth. I was wondering, and the Board of Selectmen have supported that here in Falmouth. We want to make some reference to that in here, rather than just a treatment center.
That's a big policy issue.
Have you adopted recreational
We have not.
marijuana?
We have
No,
not.
but they've supported it, as I understand.
Well, I believe what they're supporting is medical marijuana.
Medical,
use.
Yeah.
not
Medical.
recreational. The
Didn't
town
support
voted it down. It was on the town ballot, and
Yeah.
nowhere
I
in
thought it was
town.
being reconsidered.
No,
No, it was
Not at all.
overwhelmingly rejected.
just the medical marijuana. That's,
Okay.
I think that's in the news because
I hope
they
they
are
keep
in
them smoking.
favor of one on
There's two,
Yeah, the
and
medical one.
but it's medical.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of confusion on it.
apparently there's a new one that will mid-Massachusetts, and they're having such traffic problems.
Yeah,
Everybody's all
Leicester.
backed up, they can't even
Yeah.
move in town.
Talk about queuing, right?
Okay, we'll leave that one out.
So maybe you should, was there anybody who had anything before page 12 then? Okay.
Well, I did want to hop back to one of Paul's earlier statements about the adult bookstore that he'd heard about. The statute essentially ends with, it does not include this 15%. The statute, which paired, our language definition is paired from substantial or significant portion. The town of Falmouth added to that, for the purposes of this bylaw, substantial would refer to a minimum of 15%. So statute says substantial or significant. We have quantified substantial or significant in our bylaw as a minimum of 15%. So you know where it came from.
Where does that appear in the list of definitions, Tom?
It is back in the A's,
Right at the beginning, adult-related terms.
page 2 in Article 3.
I think the reason we put the 15% in is that we knew that it had to be quantified in some way, because if we close somebody down, we didn't have a quantity in there.
What is substantial or significant?
You got to have a number.
The mind of the beholder, but, yeah.
I have a general question, if I may. Several places in here, 3 or 4 times, it talks about the first publication of a notice of public hearing triggers something. I thought it was after it was adopted. Once it gets adopted, that's the trigger date. Is the trigger date the first notice?
The trigger dates are different for different actions. Some are the notice of the first public hearing, some are the date of town meeting action, some are the date of approval of a special permit. There's a variety of trigger dates. It's not consistent in state statute.
And I did have this conversation with Frank Duffy earlier today in regards to an issue we had last week with the 7,500 versus 7,200 square feet. And he said essentially if an application came in prior to the planning board posting its hearing notice, then it would be fine. But if that application came after the hearing notice by the board, it would not be. So we have to go back and look to that question, what was the application date of that fellow we talked about last week? And if it was after the publication date of the hearing notice, then 7,500 square foot is the rule, unless the AG pitches the whole thing, which is probably not going to happen unless there's substantially procedural deficiency with the bylaw. So the date of the hearing notice.
Yeah, so
from town
for a special,
council.
if somebody's filing a special permit and somebody wants to do something on their property before the change for the special permit, if you've done the thing before the first hearing date for the special permit, if you get your building permit, you're clear of any changes, or for a zoning amendment. So it's very
That's the
confusing.
first notification.
So what would be the date then on that specific one we're talking about for clarity?
What date was our hearing notice?
Which hearing, the,
The hearing to change the zoning bylaw. So for the accessory housing bylaw changes, the date that our first hearing notice was published was that date. Anything filed after that would be subject to the new bylaw.
it's not the date that the warrant was published?
The date that our hearing,
Not the date of approval either.
So
Not the date
can,
of approval.
So the
can we
hearing went
apply
back
that to
quite
a new
ways.
circumstance? Supposing the board were to draft ground-mounted solar and post a notice for public hearing on it, that would be the end of anyone being able to put up one without going through the process, is that right?
from the hearing date.
Well, that's the law, so we don't really worry about it, right? It's just how it's applied in this.
No, but it would be a way to do what we wanted to do.
I'm not following you.
If we were to have a proposal that we wanted to have a public hearing on for ground-mounted solar bylaw, as soon as we post a notice for that hearing, none can be put up until the process is complete. And that actually is already in our existing zoning book in section, I
could
think it's 2.1 something.
Post the hearing notice for 6 months later?
No.
No.
No, you can't do that.
We have to have a bylaw
Well, if an
written.
applicant
been
is
tried,
aware you're
but-
gonna post something, you better get his application in fast.
Right, and it's already in here, it's just not being mentioned yet for some reason. Will I find it?
I would guess probably somewhere in 240-225.
It's in here about 3 or 4 times.
240
It's just reflecting the different statutes.
1B, something like that. It's 240-2.1B.
Say again, please.
240-2.1. So very early in the book.
240-2.1.
Mhm. Sort of a sneaky little bit. Under exempt uses. Notwithstanding any of the foregoing?
No regulations shall apply to any structure for which a building permit has been issued prior to the first notice of a public hearing of this provision. I think that's what we just said. Provided the construction commences within 6 months after the issuance of the permit. And it goes on with a number of furthers and furthers.
Maybe a section on trigger dates would be good. Trigger dates,
Yeah, but then we'd be adding to it.
right.
We'd
Well,
have
would
to do
be
something.
Pulling from pieces.
Mhm,
It's already in here.
mhm,
It just would be pulling it together
mhm.
in one place, which we're doing in other things.
Yeah.
So where were we in our current draft bylaw that,
But I don't know where it would fit.
oh, I didn't know that was something that we just triggered looking through our current bylaw. I just wanted to make a reference to that. Okay.
So, if I might, I know it's getting close to 8:30, if people want to either continue with your comments, that's fine with me, but if you want to just
Well, we're
submit your
still just
comments-
definitions, right? We're,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did look through all the definitions and didn't find anything else that I wanted to bring up, but I wasn't looking for commas and stuff.
I think, I'm hoping that,
I haven't done anything further beyond what page 9 or something.
do you think you might have an opportunity to go through the rest of it?
Probably, now that I don't have kids coming for Thanksgiving or.
That would be, I mean, I totally appreciate your set of eyes, all of your set of eyes, but the
Not mine.
the details,
My warped detail brain.
yeah.
that's great.
You notice how many comments I have on spelling and grammar?
And notice
I'm
it's mo-
dyslexic, I just read it, just goes right through.
And it's mostly the women.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah, well, Bob Ritchie is right in line with that. I'm glad I have him as a partner, because
Yeah.
he's just, and he's
What page are we on?
comma-centric.
Right
And,
now.
and John's been real strong on this too.
Well, I'm on 14.
Yeah, and certainly
A little more
in
detail.
regards to
Alright, Katie,
Article
that
10, that's a conversation we certainly want to have with the full complement of the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Building Commissioner regarding nonconformity structures, uses, and lots.
So, well, Paul, did you have some others you could quickly give us?
What page are we on?
Whatever page.
Whatever you
Page
want.
15.
Whatever, we're trying to get, if any comments you have
Yeah.
tonight, or we're gonna move on to something
Okay, we
else.
had Marina. First line says, landing and mooring place for yachts and other non-commercial boats. Why don't we just say for non-commercial boats and vessels? Why do you have
So
to
your pages
limit
are
that?
different than my page
Yeah.
numbers, so where is?
I think that's page 15 under waterfront-related terms.
Waterfront-related terms?
Yes. Marina,
Marina, okay, with,
mooring place for non-commercial boats. and-
No.
Book's
no,
different.
Yeah, right. It's way different.
I think we need to hold up for tonight. Bob's, and we've got different books here with different pages
Yeah, I
and
have
different
different,
image, you know, and
pages.
it's getting too confusing. I think we need to all get on the same,
Well, I think everybody, we hit the print key from the documents we emailed, so I think your books should be the same. I didn't flip through each of them to make sure that,
well, we have totally different sections on
Yeah,
page
looking at
15.
that.
Yeah,
They're not even the same.
are you in Article 3, page 15?
yeah.
Article 3, definitions,
Page 15
page 15.
starts with authority, use-related, waterfront-related, water
Yeah,
resource.
see, my page 15 is residential dwelling and housing.
My
But-
page 15 is master plan,
Mine is waterfront issues.
yeah.
I mean,
I think we got through definitions almost. Something's wrong here.
I mean, I've been able to find, going back and forth. I mean, they say the same
That's
thing,
strange.
but they're just on different pages.
I can't explain that, considering we printed them all from the documents.
They shouldn't be far
same
off.
time.
They're all alphabetical by category.
Yeah.
So you should be able to, the flow of categories should be the same.
It was really strange because Bob's is totally different. So I promise you I will go through the rest of it. And do what I can do on it.
Right, I appreciate it. Now, Paul, you had something on Marina, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
Yeah, and that's what happened. When he did it, we couldn't find it.
Yeah, I couldn't find it either, so, but,
Mine's page 15.
well, it's under waterfront?
Yes.
Okay, so that's on page 17 for me, but I've got waterfront. So what was your comment?
First line, and mooring place for non-commercial boats. I only have to say yachts and other non-commercial. I have to limit it.
Yeah.
Any other comment?
Just
if water reserves-
delete non-commercial?
No,
Delete
delete
for
yachts and
yachts.
other.
Yachts and other.
Mooring place for, yachts and other. Oh, okay, yep, okay.
And then if that's the same page, impervious surface says material or structure on, above, or below the ground. I'm not sure what the above is. It'd be on or below the ground, I would
Okay,
think.
now where is that?
Under water
Water
resource
resource.
protection related terms,
Oh,
Impervious
impervious.
surface, you wouldn't have it above the ground, would you?
Well, you could, I mean, if you had a bridge, that's above the ground.
Yeah.
If you had an elevated road in some manner, or a sidewalk, or,
Jack?
anything that's elevated, that's paved, is
Yes,
impervious.
Or a solar canopy.
a ground-mounted solar array.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's existing language, so I didn't pay
Wouldn't be
attention to
considered
it.
impervious surface if it was even if it were a solar panel raised up above the ground.
Well, it says, or structure, so you have a building with a roof, that's an
Roof,
impervious
yeah.
surface.
I don't know.
I'd leave it.
A pole barn.
Yeah. I'd leave it.
After this, I have index of defined terms, and that should be the same for all of us, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I have no comments on that.
I think it's great
Yeah.
to insert.
How are you doing on that one, Bob?
And we will add that to the next draft.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like this. It was right after, it should be right after definitions.
Definition, no,
But it isn't in his.
no.
Yeah,
Then
okay.
on mine, I have Article 10, and here in the first two paragraphs, it talks about first publication of the notice
Right.
that we talked about earlier.
Right.
So,
I would just say on Article 10, kind of following up what Tom said, this is one of the ones that, at last meeting, but the zoning board, at least some member or members on the zoning board said they wanted to review it, and the zoning board should, because they deal with, this is what they deal with it. And Rod needs to review it, because, as I mentioned before, this has more changes proposed than probably any other section we're showing you, because your existing section is really out of date and doesn't cover a lot of things that are normally covered in non-conforming, so it's been expanded. So if you all also would care to take a look at it and give us any comments in the next few weeks, that would be very helpful as well, but we definitely gotta get the zoning board and Rod and probably Frank to look at it too.
And while the zoning board has this information, I will be checking with them through the staff first thing tomorrow about potential dates for another joint meeting to bring the whole body back together, to essentially dive into Article 10 and any other tweaks we might have had. We might start with Article 10 and then sort of circle back around to any other tweaks. So we'd be looking at trying to schedule that conceivably in December. I'm looking at sort of the body and Bob, because one of the other discussions we've had in-house is what are our expectations for sort of bringing something to town meeting? Do we want to just have a general discussion about recodification? We want to introduce this? And how does the timing on that work, considering the warrant closes right after Christmas? Or right at the first of the year?
We're not gonna have any time to get it done.
No.
No.
Done.
So you're saying we just give a report, a progress report?
Or committee reports?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, we would love to be ready, but as we know, being not quite ready,
It's not good, yeah.
yes, I learned that.
Hmm.
I was paying attention.
Yeah, that was quite the lesson. Could we go back to what we did on the 27th of September for a minute? Not to reopen the whole thing, but we didn't really, I wonder what's the process going to be for combing through the uses charts, which are extensive and great, and it's going, a tremendous amount of work to go back and forth to check them out. How is that process going to happen?
Well,
Are you expecting this board to do that?
we did a little bit of it, because I have some notes on.
We did, but
on-
we didn't really,
On my copy from then.
yeah.
That was one of the things that I probably said the same thing I've said tonight, that from after that meeting, we really needed the board to take a look at it and see, if you're comfortable with the way it's structured, for one, because it is new, it's in tables now, obviously, and if you, see any uses, or you see any red flags, you see any uses that you're missing that should be added. If you see uses, because when you put it in a table, it kind of jumps out to you what uses you have, where they're allowed, in what zoning categories, and how they're allowed. Because all of that's buried in your bylaw and, long paragraphs and everything. So is there anything that jumps out and say, wait a minute, why is that not allowed in this zone, or why is that a special permit, or, so that's what we're looking for, and, from the board's reaction, I guess.
I was looking for something a lot more basic. Do the tables differ in any way from what's in our current zoning bylaw? And what's the process of editing, really? And you're saying you'd like each one of us to work at it? And will the planning department work at it also? How will that careful reading take place?
If I can answer your first question first, almost everything in the existing, the new Article 6, and also in the Article, is that 6? No, whatever it is.
It is 6.
6, and then 7, which is the overlay districts.
Yeah.
Is your language today, just reorganized. Now, there is some language that we have deleted, that's over in the deleted, section. I think Ice House was one of the ones, and telephone exchange, things
Yeah.
that have been in there for decades that don't relate. And there's a couple of places where if we tweak the language, it probably says something like tweaked or new or something like that. But I would say 90+% of the language is what you have today. So that's the starting point. We just had to move everything in to start to say, because it's such a drastic difference from how it's written now to being able to see it on the tape. So, I'm happy to help work through that, however we best can do that. I know it's a lot of work, and whether that's another meeting or you individually do it at home and give Tom your comments, and then we massage those, or normally, when I'm doing this with other towns, they normally have a subcommittee that I work with, but that's irrelevant, and we meet like in the afternoons and kind of just plow through these kinds of things. If a few of you, less than a quorum, I guess, wanted to do that, I'd come down and do that. I'm open to ideas as to, there's a whole variety of ways of doing this, but if we're not going to try to get this ready for the first week in January, that means we've got some more time to kind of work our way through that one, and that's a big piece of
I'm
it.
pretty good with making that decision. You guys all set with that? We're
Oh,
not gonna, we're not gonna try for town meeting?
No, I don't think we should try for.
You all
town
good?
meeting.
Okay, that's decisions. We
Right.
don't need to take a vote. Everyone's,
Right, so, but do you have ideas also?
Be
that,
nice if we
given
could.
that,
No.
well,
No.
we got 6, well, 1, 2, 3, 5
It's
that
been going
don't.
on for so long, it'd be nice if we could do that. Do we have to make a decision tonight?
Whether
No.
we go before town meeting,
Yeah. If we get
Well-
further along in the next couple of weeks, we might make a different decision.
the next couple of weeks are, you've got all the holidays coming up.
there's too much left to do,
There's a whole lot to do.
right?
Yeah, we got a lot to do tonight.
We do, so that we want to put this
One
aside
final
and get to
comment.
it. But I'm curious about the process. Pat, Paul, and I happened to go to see Tom at about the same time, just to get ready for this meeting. So we were not purposefully getting together, we fell together, and part of our conversation was about the process for when should we go to town meeting, what should we be doing, just kind of kicking it around. And it seemed to be, without any resolution, and it seemed to be that, well, gee, maybe if we could bring to town meeting one version where we say, this is just what we have now, but it's in a new format. So it's like a verification. Then the next town meeting, we could say, here are the changes.
I
They
think
need
you
to
open
be
it up to a
considered.
lot of confusion. I think we get our act together first and before we start
Because then
making.
people are looking at, the question in their minds is, what's new and what's not new?
Yeah.
How much above this has changed? And it'll be a very difficult
And that
question
can all
to
be
answer.
part of the hearings we have before the warrant's written.
What's the date of the warrant cutoff? January sometime, isn't it?
Typically right after the first.
Typically January, so really there's not enough time.
No.
No,
Yeah, that's, I think
Totally
we
not
can
enough.
safely make that decision.
I don't want to open this up for being half-baked. I'd like to see us go through this process, complete it, and then when it comes time to go before town meeting, we hold the public hearings about the warrant article, and we can address all those concerns then, and we can have slides showing this is what it was, this is what it is now. I think if we start doing a piecemeal, we're just gonna really confuse people, because there were a lot of comments at this town meeting about how it used to be about deciding the lifeguard salary, and now we're deciding real technical things. And I think we need to give people the time and the right forums to educate people on what we're trying to do, so.
We're all saying a lot of things here, but I just want to rephrase what my original understanding is. This version we're working on now is not should not be changing any public policy, right? This is just the wording of the documents, right? And if we're going to make big policy changes, they should be done separately.
not big, any,
Yeah,
any.
Yeah.
Any policy changes,
Right.
yeah.
and I think when we see how clearly this will appear, I think it's gonna highlight some areas that we want to change. Because you look at some of the districts, and you look at the uses in some of them, it's like, why do we have it separated in 3 or 4 districts as opposed to maybe just 2? With, maybe adding some uses to one versus another. So I think that's what I noticed when I was looking at the charts, is so many of the uses, there weren't a whole lot of differences between some of the districts and their uses.
It's because we let everything get into agricultural.
Yeah, but even in the business
Yeah,
districts too.
that's true.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul. Okay.
to get over this, I have a couple of comments. The one
Okay.
final comment. On Article 10, page 4.
Yeah.
3 paragraphs from the bottom. It says the Board of Public Works. It should be Department of Public Works.
Oh, okay, yeah, did you once have a board? I think that's existing
There
language.
was,
I don't know where that came from.
there once was a board.
Hmm?
There once was a board, as I understand it.
There once was a board, I think that's a story. Okay,
Okay.
And the other
Can I
thing,
make
if
a
you-
motion to adjourn and not yet?
No, well, we have other things we need to do.
Yeah,
I'd
we-
like to move on.
Yeah,
could,
I know, I'm joking.
right, before.
You have anything?
well, I just
Critical?
wanted to see if we could get some consensus, going back to Charlotte's question about how we're all going to review Article 6 and Article 7, the tables and everything. If there's some, if you want to talk about that now, or you want to think about that and get back to us. And again, I mean, I'm open to helping that however we can help.
What are your thoughts, Pat?
Probably, it would be best if we did it individually and then brought it to the board and went over it and gathered some kind of consensus. Does that make any sense or not?
Would the people,
Yeah, it-
Without Bob.
Subcommittee.
Yeah,
but would the people involved in that be the others who are part of this process? Just the staff and Rod and the ZBA? Who exactly is going to be reviewing this?
I don't know because I haven't looked at it in
Yeah.
that kind of detail yet to know. And Bob was saying a lot of people, a lot of places just have a subcommittee
Subcommittee.
looking at the whole thing and beating up on it and then bringing it back to the people involved.
well, I know one thing, if we ever want to not have something in the newspaper, we want to schedule this before anything important, because everybody leaves. The reporter's gone, everybody's out of here. It's a great tactic if you want to talk about something.
Drive them out in droves.
There's nobody there.
Maybe we could do this. Between now and our next meeting, we could each give a stab at going through Articles 6 and 7, see what's involved in actually doing it carefully, and bring our comments back, and then make a recommendation about how to do the final review, so that we're comfortable knowing there aren't any policy changes involved in what we're presenting to town meeting. That's what we're trying to do.
And just put it on the agenda on the planning board discussion comments on sections 6 and 7.
Right. And I'm wondering if there's any possibility of staff support for this activity.
There's always that possibility. Yes, ma'am. And our next meeting is in a week.
And again, if you come up with a question or an issue or something that I can help with, just let Tom know, and he can get in touch with me pretty easily. Respond.
Thank you.
Okay?
Okay,
Okay.
so we're going to do 6 and 7 for next week?
Yeah.
Is that, I'm sorry, you have a planning board meeting next week?
Yes,
December 4th.
Yeah. And we will discuss
and the
On
process.
the
I won't,
Go- You don't have to come,
I
no.
won't
Yeah.
be here.
And then we'll be ready to, we'll have the process for finishing. We got to get a game plan to finish this.
Right.
And we should have that for next week.
Where's Article 7?
It's in the thing we had for the 27th? The
It's in the
thicker of the two
previous
books?
version, the August 28th.
That's what I was just looking at. I've got Article 6 and
Well,
it
there's a,
jumps to
if
8.
you look, there's a typo in the header, so Article 6 goes to Article 6, but if you go to,
What page number, Tom?
Eight. Oh, yeah.
issue we had is that there's a typo in the header. If you look at this, they're actually in Article 7.
Where's that? front?
It's one of those things where it was, you know, we're ahead of this.
Three,
You
before
have Article
three?
4.
So that's in the,
go back
this is November 24th, this is the August 28th version. It has
27.
Article 7 in it. Article 6 and Article 7 were part of the August 28th drafts,
Oh,
but we're not in this particular version. 'Cause I
And
thought
it's
we were trying to keep it
August
two.
and it begins with page 1 again.
Yeah, it does, that's the
There,
problem. So you
each
can't even
section is
say that.
separately paginated.
Yeah, so that's, right now in the drafting, we're drafting each article separately, so
Book
each
with you.
article will start
No, I
with
didn't
page
bring that.
1,
That's what I thought.
but that will
Uh-huh.
change once we put everything
Yeah.
together.
We had this for our meeting on September 27th,
September.
I believe.
Correct.
Yeah.
September 27th, right.
So currently, the
Yeah.
board has two books, one from August 28th and the recent draft from
Yeah, so, we
To do with this, without the playbook.
November 24th.
right. Well, you have it, you just didn't bring it with you tonight, because you didn't expect to need it.
I assume it isn't, yeah.
Okay, Bob, I think we're gonna hold it up for tonight, and we're gonna have one more meeting, and then we're gonna get back to you with a game plan. I think we might wanna talk about that subcommittee, aspect of it for knocking the last things out. But we'll have to, what I think we should all do is everything we've got, get it to Tom now, and then we'll get together and lay out a plan for finishing it.
It's gonna take me the full
Okay,
week
It must be cold
to
at
go
that
through
end of the
this,
room.
6 and 7.
Let's,
So we have, you know, so it's next meeting, we're gonna have to talk about a subcommittee if we're going. to.
yeah, we're gonna talk about it next meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
See.
It's cold
Okay.
on the floor,
Okay.
too.
We all set?
Freezing down there.
Related to that, one of the things you have in the book tonight is the article organization. So I just point out that Article 9, 11, 12, 13, and 14, which most of them are like Article 2 that we looked at tonight, not much changes. Those are all in, we've done our first draft, we brought all the stuff over from, we've organized it, we've done our first draft, we're working on our second draft. Once we have that finished, we'll send that to Tom, and that can be on one of your, it won't be for next week, that's for sure, but it'll be on one of your future meetings.
Yep.
And those will be much easier to do than Article 6 and 7 and Article 10.
What's gonna be easy? Excuse me.
I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic. Fixing, doing the edits is a critical piece of this.
It is. Thank you for your time tonight. I'd like to move on. We have
Thank you.
more to do.
All right.
Okay.
You available for a call in the morning?
Yep.
I am not.
Okay.
I'm not. Thursday morning.
Okay.
possibly.
That's fine. I just want to chat these things up while we're still.
We definitely need to talk.
Absolutely.
What do you think about town meeting recap? Should we do that? I think I'd like to spend more time on that than I want to
Do we
tonight.
have tonight?
So I would like to do that another night. Yes, Charlotte, what would you like to say?
The longer we put it off, the dimmer it grows in our minds.
I know.
I have a list, so I can keep mine going.
I thought you had this other one.
What?
Church?
No,
they
that was,
postponed.
that's not happening, but
Supposed
we,
to know.
we had an assignment given to us this week, that there's something on the agenda that was not planned, and it's gonna take some discussion, and I just got notified of it a couple of days ago, and it has to be decided tonight,
Okay.
so I wanna get to it.
Which is what?
Good. It's pretty big. The
Advisory
appointment to the Route 28 Advisory Committee. The biggest, well, let's first of all, before we jump around, I'd like to make a motion that we move the town meeting recap to another night.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You can be opposed. I just wanted to keep it moving, Janet.
Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to keep,
know.
I just wanted to keep it moving, sorry. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks,
Good
Margaret.
night.
I'll see you.
The next one is, and I can tell you the truth, I spent my whole day on this next issue because it popped up and landed on my desk, and I had to talk with the town manager and Tom and other things, and it's what I worked on most of the day. So, the appointment to the Route 28 Citizens Advisory Committee. There's a lot of heat on this. The selectmen are looking for cover. They basically want to have a citizens advisory group, and I've got some clarification. What their concern is, if there's too much discontent on this, that the state won't want to proceed, and it can only go through the state because they're paying for it. So if it was made clear to me by conversations today with the assistant town manager, which I found them, they were objecting to us or worried about us talking about complete streets and smart growth tonight, as it relates to this, and I got a phone call on that, and I said, whoa, what's going on? So I spent a long time on the phone with him. The long and the short of it is, everyone's concerned that if we're not flexible, and the neighbor and the people that are being affected by this really get upset that the state will just punt it and not do it at all. And so that's the risk. So they didn't, there was some real concerns about the term complete streets, because it means different things to different people. So that's why I wanted to have sent to all of you our local comprehensive plan with the sections of both transportation and land use. And as you can see, we have reviewed, studied, recommended, and it got approved at town meeting that we are going to try to do complete streets going forward. And the concern on some of the conversations that I had today was, and it's primarily with assistant town manager, that if we're not flexible, nothing will get done. So I guess I just wanted to, tonight, reiterate, well, first of all, we need somebody that's going to serve in this position. And second of all, you know, I tried to get them to define what they're worried about, and it really comes down to, I think some interpretation of complete streets has sidewalks and bike paths on both sides, and they feel that that's not, okay, that the neighborhood, if you would, that's being affected by this doesn't want that.
I went to one of the hearings. Did you go to any of the hearings?
No.
Oh, I went to the one that was up at St. Anthony's. And a lot of people turned out for it, and they feel very strongly about it. I think it was after that meeting, or shortly after that meeting, that the project got cut back to, not from Oxbow, but back to the administration building. Because the people who turned out at St. Anthony's anyway, spoke mostly, a lot of it was about the biking people, but they were the people who were living between administration and Oxbow. And land that they thought actually was theirs has turned out to belong to the state. They're going to lose their trees and all the things that we read in the newspapers. So
I got to tell you, when I got that comment from people that they're losing their land, I said, when you bought it, did you read your deed? I mean, I find that really hard. Maybe it's because I practice real estate, but
right. No, I
knew
know.
any piece of property I've ever bought, I knew where the lot lines were. And I think that, I don't really buy that argument.
I'm not sure it was an argument. I think it was more an expression of a strongly felt emotion
Well,
about
they are trying to make a motion.
character and appearance of their neighborhood. But they've cut the project back now. So those people are going to be not so frequently present at these meetings. It will be from the green, because it comes from Palmer Ave. So it goes right through downtown, even though that's a town road, up to the administration building.
Well, I don't
I
think
wanna
it's fair
finish
to
one-
say
one-
they cut the project back. What they said, they're deferring that project until they have a hearing. They're going forward with the roadway project and the water main all the way to Oxbow. They're doing that part.
Yeah, the water part.
But the other part is being deferred until they get more
Okay,
input.
the-
What my concern is with this is, ex officio member is David Viera, and he's come out publicly against the project. So if he's on the committee, he's against the project,
Well,
it raises a concern in my mind.
Well, that's not our concern, that's a townwide concern, but our job tonight is to pick someone from this board to serve on that committee, and that's what I'm trying to stay focused on. The main point I wanted to make is, I feel that I don't think that the Davis Straits reset works without complete streets and smart growth. The whole reason for doing that is smart growth in our village centers and our growth around it, and that was the whole vision we had. And if, it just doesn't work.
In your mind, Jim, does complete streets mean a bikeway on both sides? Certainly it means a sidewalk on both sides, but does it mean a bikeway on both sides?
I don't know. I don't think that,
So you're flexible.
I think you have to be flexible. What I'd really like to do is hear from an expert in that area on the impacts that has. I'm not an expert on what bike paths do or whatnot. I mean, that's a traffic and study, and then we should have hearings on it. The main point I wanted to make was that our vision of village centers where all our housing problem, this is related to everything we do. It's so important. It's not just this street, okay? It's related to everything we do. We have a housing program that is requiring us to develop 75 affordable housing units per year.
74.
What?
74.
Well, it's gonna change every year. I
Yeah.
did some math on it. It averages out to be 82 if you
Oh.
keep, because every year you do it, it gets up higher. So I just rounded a number in. We're gonna have the vision that I thought we had on our local comprehensive plan and building up our village centers, because that's where the public transportation is, that's where the sewers are going to be. That's where our housing needs to go. And in order to do that, we need complete streets. The design of the street is gonna make the whole thing work. You know, it'll make it work. By having streets with sidewalks, maybe at least sidewalks on both sides, a bike path, street trees, the whole vision of the community is be relating on how we do this street, so it's very, very important. And someone's gonna have to go there and sit at this meeting, and they need to advocate. They have to be flexible in the end, but I think this is our major plan, our local comprehensive plan, everything we've done relates to it.
Well, Mashpee has that path on one side of the road that's both pedestrian and bikes.
Does that work if it's big enough? I know, I'm a little concerned about a blind person or somebody else where somebody's driving their bike to work going fast, you know? I don't know how you do that, but there's gotta be, we need,
Well, it comes down to design.
right.
I mean, that's,
So I think with the right design, we could do less.
Practical question. How often is this committee going to meet?
Tom, you have any input on that?
The information I have is the notice that you also have in your booklet, if I may. Selectmen seat candidates for the Route 28 Citizen Advisory Committee. The purpose of this committee is to evaluate design options for the third phase of the proposed Main Street Corridor project, which includes Route 28 from Sandwich Road to the intersection of Oxbow Road intersection. The committee will review design alternatives prepared by staff and consulting engineers and provide input in further developing these designs. The committee is charged with soliciting citizen input and providing selectmen with the design recommendation by April 5, 2019. It'll be comprised of 9 members, 6 of which will be at large, 1 planning board designee, 1 bikeway committee member, 1 disability committee member, the town moderator as a non-voting ex officio member. It does not say the frequency with which things should be done. It just says they wish to have those design recommendations by April 5th, 2019.
So this impacts, as far as I'm concerned, the whole idea of the Davis Straits
It does.
project, because if you're not, we wouldn't be doing Davis Straits if you weren't working on complete streets and smart growth. Pat, do you need to say something?
Yeah, I do, because this is from Sandwich Road to the Oxbow Road connection. This isn't the Davis Straits corridor.
I know, but the connection to the Davis Straits still has to be done.
Wait a minute. This particular space and road is more amenable to complete streets than we have right here in downtown. Or as you go out to T-Ticket, where you have buildings right against the street already. We are a very, very old town, and a lot of buildings were put right on the streets. And unless you go and take all those buildings and tear them down, we're not gonna have complete streets there. Wait a
Right,
minute,
yeah,
Jim.
I understand.
Okay? What we did with the local comprehensive plan is we took a very, very long-range view, 50 to 100 years. Every opportunity that we get, I think we should try to, as much as possible, put in a version of complete streets. We're not going to succeed to make the whole vision of complete streets.
Yeah.
That's an impossibility,
It isn't
both
like Washington
expense-wise
DC where
and
you had
space-wise.
Oh, I understand that.
120-foot road layout.
I'm not,
Right.
I'm not expecting we can solve all those
No,
problems.
so we have to be reasonable when we say this, and we have to look
You're reading
toward-
this differently than I am reading it.
How are you reading it?
I read this, that it's the proposed Main Street corridor project, which as I understand it begins at Palmer Ave, which includes, it doesn't say it's only.
It does include Davis Straits. Yep.
I think that this committee they're putting together is to look at the Main Street corridor project, and they're trying to say, and make no mistake, it's going to include from the admin building up to Oxbow. It doesn't exclude.
I was reading it quite differently,
Yeah,
Charlotte.
you were, and
Who knows?
Tom, do you know which it is? Could be either way.
I'm under the impression it's the third phase, so from the administration building out, from.
So it's only that
The
section.
purpose of this committee is to evaluate design options for the third phase of the proposed Main Street corridor project, which includes Route 28 from Sandwich Road intersection to Oxbow Road intersection.
So it's
I read
just the disputed
read it.
So
part.
it's only from Sandwich Road?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's what
Yeah.
I'm reading here.
yeah.
This is
that's
just
how I
the
read it.
disputed part.
So what's happening
it's-
on the part from
Well, we
Jones
are-
Road to Sandwich Road?
What the state proposed, I suppose.
Well, if you said that there's concern about funding being in jeopardy, it's because of the third phase. It sounds like if the third phase doesn't get approved in some fashion, the state will pull out of phase one and phase two. That's what it sounds like.
Okay, they could be related from that aspect.
And that's the concern.
Well,
That's what it sounds like, Jim.
Well, the water
That's-
main was approved by town meeting,
That
so
water
that's
main-
going forward, all the way to Oxbow.
But
That's
that's
one
not
project.
widening the streets.
And the only thing deferred, as far as I know, is from Sandwich Road to Oxbow. They've
Correct.
deferred that pending the setup of a committee, et cetera, et cetera.
But if
What
the
that looks like has to be negotiated.
Jim says the concern is that the state will pull out the funding and it won't happen.
well, I was told that was what was relayed to me today by the Assistant Town Manager, that their concern is, when they saw, it really triggered, all I did is add the words complete street and smart growth to the agenda, and it triggered a firestorm of comments.
Well, there were a lot of people at the high school. And there was a lot of concern.
Well, we need to appoint one of us to be at this, and I just wanted to be sure whoever goes there will try as reasonably, I forget the right words to use, to keep complete streets in some fashion in and not back away on it, just so they can get the street done. Because here's the point I wanted to make. The section of road, this section of road we're talking about, the heaviest traffic we have in our town is on Route 28, the super highway. Okay, 22,000 cars a day, a daily average. T-Ticket has 18,800. It's 80% of that road, and people live on the road. They have sidewalks, bike paths. You know, we're talking about a huge traffic thing where we have a lot of people, and I just want to make sure that we keep the safety that complete streets, whichever fashion we can get in, the most we can without, I'm not expecting to tear down buildings,
You can't.
but,
But remember what we're talking about tonight. One of the whole reasons for this exercise we're doing with recodification is the welfare of the people.
right.
And when you look at complete streets, what we're talking about is the welfare of the people. We want people to be able to walk, to ride their bicycles in their neighborhood. And Route 28 is their neighborhood.
And
And
we're
we
also
want them to be
looking,
able to do it safely.
and we're also looking long-term, connecting the villages.
Yeah, and that's the
Correct.
connecting the villages is really important.
And I think, I believe in compromise, and I've used the term something light, and I think we could do a complete streets light in this.
I'm in
street.
favor of that too. I just wanted to have this conversation, so whoever steps up and takes this position,
Yeah, I would, but I am chairing 2 other committees right now.
Paul, you got your hand up, you ready? Is that a volunteer?
No, I think anyone on this committee understands what our concerns are with the local comprehensive plan. They can adequately present the issues of the planning board. It's a requirement for the planning board to have a representative on this, so we need to appoint someone.
Right.
I would like to recommend Charlotte Harris as the representative for the planning board to this committee,
How do you feel about
28
that, Charlotte?
Citizens Advisory Committee.
Well, it seems to be for a relatively short duration. It's over by April 5th. I just wondered how many meetings. And I also wonder if it would be more effective and acceptable to that neighborhood if someone, I live in North Falmouth, and I certainly drive up and down that road, but I'm less affected by it than some other members of the board. I wonder if it would be better, I'm willing to do it, but I wonder if it would be better for someone who lives and uses that road constantly to be doing this.
That's John. Oops.
Don't hear a lot of noise down there.
I'm on a lot of committees already.
Yeah.
And I have a little different viewpoint, so,
Well, what is your viewpoint?
well, somewhat similar to yours, that the people that live there already know they don't own the land. My father-in-law lived right on Route 28. He's passed away. He was 93. And the last time they widened the road in East Falmouth, his house is 1 foot off the road. And they put a sidewalk, and between the sidewalk and his house, there's about 2 feet. And he said, hey, I knew it. I've known it all along. And he said,
Yeah,
that's just, it's progress. That's what he said.
and what,
And there's other people that don't want that progress, but there are problems. You take where Supreme Pizza is, I mean,
Yeah.
their building is here, the sidewalk and the street.
this is critical to the welfare of our town. This is the major corridor for
And-
our whole town for everything.
And my office,
Everything.
my office is right on Davis Street.
Yeah,
Right across from AutoZone
Yeah.
and Papagino's. And the street is wider there. There's a sidewalk on my side. It's old, it's dilapidated, but it gets used a lot. There is a bike room on both sides of the street, but on the other side, on the AutoZone side, where there isn't any sidewalk, I see people constantly going both direction, walking in that bike area. I see people in wheelchairs being pushed in that bike area, as dangerous as can be. I mean, there really isn't, because the town has grown, the traffic has grown, there is a reason for this.
right.
That's why it's a long-term view, but whenever and wherever we can, we need to come down on the side of safety.
That's where, those are the key words that I like.
What?
Whatever and wherever. I mean, that we need to have some guidance for whoever steps up for this role. And I think they should come back to us with a report. If there's a big compromise, maybe report back to us and we can all weigh in.
Well, you know, the Bikeways Committee is going to have a rep too, and I remember reading that Scott Lindell said, one side is fine. You know, a footpath, a bike path on one side would do it.
Right.
It might be, yes,
Are there
But
any-
sidewalks on both sides.
Are there any other
He didn't say that.
nominations
He just
to
said
this
one
committee?
side.
Anyone want to nominate someone other than Charlotte Harris?
don't see any.
Pam might do it.
All in favor of Charlotte Harris? I second that motion.
You
All-
second that emotion.
All in favor?
Terrible.
Aye.
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 Opposed? Congratulations, Charlotte.
Thanks, Jim.
Isn't it also true, though, that in certain areas, you can ride bikes on sidewalks?
I don't see anyone else who can do it.
I'm sure you could out there. It
Yeah.
could be designated a sidewalk bike path,
Right.
like our bike path.
Well, if it's wide enough.
It's
Yeah.
wide enough.
Yeah.
If it's wide
If
enough.
It's wide enough.
You know, you go down south, you got like Hilton Head, they're 8, 10 feet wide,
Yeah,
and it accommodates that.
yeah. Well, I think the one in Mashpee is probably 5 or 6.
I have people that work for me that live in East Falmouth that ride the bus up and down the corridor. This corridor, it's gonna solve all our housing issues are gonna be resolved with this corridor. You know, all
I
the
wouldn't say all of them,
Well,
but
most
it'll
of
help
them,
tremendously.
well, most of them it will be, if you take a look at some of those,
And as
And
much
our-
as we want to develop, keep density in the village centers and close to the village centers, we do have 22 acres of land out behind Falmouth lumber that eventually, I think that would probably get used for housing, because
it could be, but they should be able to ride their bikes all the way.
and that's the
to East
argument,
Falmouth
that's
and
the
down.
argument for a complete street.
And the last thing I wanted to point out, just an observation I had this year. A couple years ago, we approved site plan for on-the-water place out, and a beautiful building. And I conditioned it, I thought I conditioned it, that there'd be a bike rack there. Well, there was never a bike rack there, because they said, their applicant said, no one ever rides their bike on 28. I went to a business after hours event there, and it was at 5 o'clock at night, and I saw almost 10 people riding their bikes. It was the J1 students, because the big hotel in T-Ticket was converted to a J1 hotel, and they all live there, have buses and don't have cars. And those are the people that work in all our restaurants and stores. So this impacts Main Street. It impacts employees everywhere. It's really, really important.
Have you looked at a map of that area? And see any potential for having a bikeway and a walkway that's not directly on the street, that is behind the first row of houses or behind somewhere? Is there any possibility for that?
But I think people's biggest complaint is taking down trees. And if you move the way behind the trees, I think people would be willing to give up a couple feet of what they consider to be their front yard if the tree is saved, by just going, and it all comes down to design. I mean, I keep coming
They
back
don't
to
want to
that.
lose the character of the area.
Right.
I see that.
Right.
But I wonder what other options there are aside from just sticking it somewhere between the street and the houses.
Well,
Is there another?
A great street design
I see one.
can affect the livability of the whole area. It really, really is important.
Mhm.
And if we move along to a form-based code someday, the street is where you start.
Right.
And then it becomes, they use the term public realm throughout form-based code.
Well, strangely, many of those houses, not all of them because it varies tremendously, but many of them are at about the build-to line we've been talking about for Davis Strait.
Right. And I run in the morning, early sometimes, and I'm running on Mill Road, and it's got a sidewalk on it, and so people say, oh geez, it's got a sidewalk. You know, it is deadly on that sidewalk.
yeah.
The big trees that we all love have ruined it, so there's mounds and stuff like that. And so when I run out into the street, people are going by and blasting the horn at me, get out back, they scream at you. I think we need to start designing streets for people, not cars, and make it pedestrian-friendly and safe. And yes, we have to have cars, but
So you're saying narrow the street?
take the safety into consideration and listen to the design experts and do
I'm
what
just
they,
trying to apply what you're saying, and it sounds like narrow the street.
I don't know how big the
Not
street
with the
is.
huge SUVs, and they're all stopping making the sedans now.
Remember last year, there was a couple of kids' H-1 visas were run over in the
Right.
eastern part of the
Right.
Cape. It'd be horrible if that would've happened here.
Well, I can tell you, they ride up and down T-Ticket like crazy
Yeah.
on those blue bikes.
They do.
See them on Woods Hole
Any
Road,
rate.
too.
Yeah, they see them on Woods Hole Road, so it's just real important, and I just wanted to have, so I think we're all on the same page
The
here.
street
No one-
design that they've proposed, in order to put in that bike path, they're actually widening the street. I don't know if you know where Curly Boulevard is up in North
Oh,
Falmouth.
yeah.
That, the people are, including myself, zipping up and down there at 70 miles an hour because it's too wide. It's a ridiculous road. It never should have been built that way. And it's got,
It's curved and everything.
yeah, it's got lined, but it's got just enough of a straightaway to zoom. And they've put a yellow line so that this part's supposed to be for bikes. Puts bikes and walkers and everybody, but it's for the cars trying to get around somebody turning into a driveway, and it's a free-for-all.
But if
So
they had been
that-
following complete streets, that may not have been built that way.
If they'd kept a little old-fashioned road that you couldn't race on,
Yeah.
it would be safer.
Yeah, you widen the road, you increase the speed. That's
Right.
151, they did
Always.
that.
Yep.
Well, this road we're talking about has the same, almost the same traffic as our superhighway in town. You know, so it's really an overburdened road.
But it has pedestrians on it,
Right.
Yeah,
And sidewalks, I mean, and houses.
and bicycles.
And bicycles,
which
so
you
it's
don't-
just, I think we're all on the same page. I
We
didn't
are,
mean to,
yeah.
Charlotte, I'm really glad you're taking this.
You owe
It'd be
me
nice to
big
have,
time.
I'll agree to
do.
that.
be nice to have
Surprised Pam
updates.
didn't get
whenever
I'll
you have
tell you what, I'll
meetings.
give you half my pay.
Half his pay.
Such a sport.
Okay, thank you.
okay.
Do you have any correspondence for you?
Yeah, meetings the next 2 weeks.
So,
Right.
future agenda items, want to run us down anything?
Yes, we have a number of site plans and special permits that have been rolling in prior to town meeting. So we are going to have a fair amount of sort of current planning at our next meeting, looking at those decisions that we've already voted and those that are coming in over the threshold. So we've got the 7th and the 11th is what we've got scheduled for this month. We don't have anything scheduled for the 17th or the 25th currently.
You said the 7th.
This 4th and the 11th.
Thank you. The
I won't
4th.
be here for the
Fourth.
11th.
I put 7 days in between the dates, so yes, December 4th and December
So
11th.
we can't have anything when you're not gonna be here that would take a supermajority, right?
Oh.
I don't know
yeah,
if you have anything. Bob's gonna not
I'm
be
not
here on
gonna
the
be here the
11th.
11th.
Yeah,
Oh.
Always, if you would, just send me a note when you're gonna be gone, just so I understand, so we're
Okay.
not scheduling folks for things like that. So no Bob on the 11th.
Okay,
Okay,
is there anything on the back page? No?
Could, future agenda item for next week, maybe at least to get started, ground-mounted solar regulations, or bylaw, however you want to call it. We don't have any, as we know.
No, we don't.
Say that again, please?
Ground-mounted solar bylaw, to just make a beginning on it, or have a plan for making a beginning on it. If we think it's as important as we appeared to believe, we should get started.
I agree.
Before we do that, we should talk about what happened at the last town
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah,
Yes, we
let's get-
should,
that
so
could-
yes.
Yeah, because I made some mistakes at
Let's
the
do
last
that
town
first,
meeting.
then.
We voted against extending the time to discuss it, too.
When was that?
You wanted to put off the discussion of town meeting.
So town meeting recap,
No, I
Yeah.
We need to get it on.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted to
Let's start-
discuss it
let's-
tonight.
For sure.
Right.
we can start early with that if you'd like.
Yes,
Okay, put that early and the applicants after.
yes.
At 6 o'clock, come in early.
And more heat.
This is-
Okay.
Sign on the door says,
I
bring
moved
your own heat.
We've adjourned, right?
Okay, we've adjourned? Okay.
Thank you, everybody.